My name's Adrian Holt. I'm 32 now, but this story really started when I was 24, back when I thought family loyalty meant something. I grew up with one older brother, Marcus. He was the kind of guy who could talk himself out of anything, and he knew it. Teachers loved him, our parents doted on him, and when he wanted something, it was only a matter of time before he got it. I was quieter, more methodical. While Marcus was out partying, I was the one tinkering in the garage, sketching ideas, and figuring out how to turn them into something real. By the time I was 23, I had done something that surprised everyone. I started a small but promising logistics software company out of my apartment. I didn't have much: an old laptop, a cheap desk from a thrift store, and an obsession with efficiency that probably scared off more dates than I'd like to admit. But I worked. Nights, weekends, whenever I wasn't doing contract jobs to keep the lights on. Slowly, the code got better. I signed my first client. Then 2 more. By the end of the first year, I had 5 steady contracts and was making enough to quit my side gigs. That's when Marcus took notice. He'd never asked much about my work before, but suddenly he was calling me up for brotherly advice. He'd swing by my apartment with coffee, which was uncharacteristically generous, and ask about the software. I was naive enough to think he was proud of me. And maybe, in a way, he was, but not in the way I hoped. A few months later, Marcus pitched me a brilliant idea. We should partner up. He said I had the technical skills, and he had the business mind. Think about it, Adrian. He told me over dinner one night, leaning back in his chair like he was already closing a deal. You're good at building things. I'm good at making money with them. Together, we could double, maybe triple what you're pulling in now. I hesitated. Marcus had charm, sure, but I also knew he liked shortcuts, and shortcuts in business usually meant someone else was getting burned. Still, he was my brother. Against my better judgment, I agreed to bring him in as a minority partner. I figured I could handle the operations and keep control. We drew up a contract, something basic but clear enough. I kept 70% ownership. He'd get 30% and handle client acquisition. For a while, things actually went well. Marcus landed a few big contracts faster than I could have managed on my own. We expanded into a small office, hired 2 part-time developers, and even upgraded our equipment. I started thinking maybe I'd been wrong about him. But cracks started forming. Marcus would promise features to clients that we hadn't even discussed, putting me in a scramble to deliver on things we weren't ready for. He'd take meetings without looping me in, and I'd find out later that he'd quoted prices far higher than we'd agreed, then pocketed the difference without telling me. When I confronted him, he'd just smile and say, "Relax, little brother. I'm just making sure we both eat well." Then came the day that still makes my stomach twist. I walked into the office one morning to find our 2 developers looking uneasy. One of them, Maya, pulled me aside and said Marcus had called a meeting the night before, without me, and told them I was stepping down to focus on coding while he took over as CEO. She thought it was strange, especially since I hadn't mentioned anything about it. I confronted Marcus immediately. He didn't even try to deny it. "Face it, Adrian," he said, leaning back in my chair, with his feet on my desk. "You're brilliant, but you're not cut out to run a company. You get too hung up on the details. I'm going to take us to the next level." That was the first time I saw the real plan. And the worst part? The contract we'd signed had a clause, one he'd insisted on adding, that allowed either partner to buy out the other with a simple majority vote. With his 30% and the transferred shares from the 2 developers, which he'd convinced them to sign over in exchange for inflated salaries, he had 60% control. Just like that, my company, my creation, was gone. He handed me a check for what he called my share and told me I should be grateful. It was insultingly low, barely enough to cover my living expenses for a few months. I didn't fight it. Not then. I was too stunned, too sick with the feeling that I'd been played in the worst way possible. My parents? They sided with Marcus, of course. "He's the older brother," my dad said, as though that explained everything. "He knows what he's doing." Mom just shook her head and said, "You're too sensitive, Adrian. Business is business." In the weeks that followed, I went through a fog. I watched from the outside as Marcus plastered his face across industry articles, bragging about his innovations, my innovations. Friends reached out, confused about why I'd left the company, and I gave them vague answers. I couldn't bring myself to admit I'd been blindsided by my own brother. But while I kept my mouth shut publicly, inside, something hardened. I started paying attention, watching his moves. And little by little, I began noticing things Marcus didn't want anyone to see. And then, one night, over a drink with an old client, I learned something that made my pulse quicken. Something that Marcus would never want to judge or anyone to know. I didn't act right away. I waited. 5 years, to be exact. 5 years to build something new, something better. 5 years to put myself in a position where, when the time came, I wouldn't just get even, I'd end it all for him. And that moment was about to arrive. In the years after Marcus took the company, I learned to live with a quiet sort of bitterness. It was like carrying around a shard of glass in my chest, not enough to kill me, but sharp enough to hurt every time I thought about it. I kept my distance from family gatherings. Not that I was really invited much anymore. When I did show up, Marcus was always front and center, telling exaggerated stories about his successes while our parents beamed at him like he'd just invented the internet. If I so much as corrected a detail, Mom would touch my arm and murmur, "Don't start, Adrian," as though I were the one picking a fight. He'd lean into it, too. "You know, little brother," he'd say loud enough for everyone to hear. "I still can't believe you used to try running that company. You were drowning in spreadsheets while I was bringing in real clients." People would chuckle awkwardly, and I'd force a smile, but my stomach would knot every time. The worst part was that he didn't just rewrite history at family dinners. He did it in public. I'd run into old colleagues who would say things like, "Man, Marcus really saved that company after you left. Must have been a relief for you." At first, I tried explaining what really happened, but Marcus was always a step ahead, spinning the story so thoroughly that my words sounded like sour grapes. Eventually, I stopped trying. I poured my energy into starting over. My new business, under a different name, with no family involvement, grew slowly but steadily. I kept my profile low, deliberately avoiding press or flashy announcements. The last thing I wanted was for Marcus to notice I was doing well. But he still found ways to needle me. One time, at my parents' anniversary party, he sidled up to me with a glass of champagne and said, "So, still doing that little freelance thing? I mean, good for you. Man, not everyone's built for the big leagues." He clapped me on the shoulder like he was offering encouragement. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice even. "It's going fine." He smirked like he knew exactly how much that answer cost me. Our parents didn't help. Dad would brag about Marcus's latest deal and then look at me with that faint frown, like I was an ongoing disappointment. Mom would slip me gentle hints about patching things up with my brother, saying it was foolish to hold grudges in business. I never told her that Marcus had completely cut me out of the market we once worked in together, going as far as blacklisting me with certain clients. One of those clients, a mid-sized shipping company, called me up out of the blue one day. The owner, whom I'd worked with years before, sounded almost apologetic. "Adrian, I wanted to reach out because I heard you've been doing your own thing. I'd love to work with you again, but, well, Marcus told us you'd left the industry after a breakdown. He said it was best we didn't drag you back into it." I remember sitting there, holding the phone in silence for a long beat. A breakdown. That's what he was telling people now. Not that he'd pushed me out. Not that he'd rewritten the company's ownership. No, in his version, I was just too fragile to handle the pressure, and he'd nobly stepped in to save the day. That was the moment I stopped thinking of Marcus as a brother and started thinking of him as something else. An opponent. Someone who played a long game, but not as long as mine. The more I heard, the clearer it became that he was getting sloppy. Whispers about over-promising and under-delivering. Delayed projects. Even rumors that he'd been shifting company funds into a personal account. I didn't jump at it. I just filed it away. Every little misstep. Every loose thread. And then came the charity gala. A big, flashy event for local entrepreneurs. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Pictures of Marcus were all over social media the next morning. Smiling in a tux, posing with politicians, and, in one shot that made me pause, standing with a man I recognized from years ago. A man who'd been convicted for running a shady overseas import scheme. That image stuck in my head like a spark on dry grass. Because if Marcus was working with him, there was a good chance Marcus had left behind a trail. And if I could find it, I'd finally have what I needed. I didn't know yet just how tangled that trail would be, or how, a few years later, Marcus would walk straight into my hands. It was almost exactly 5 years to the day since Marcus had taken my company when the betrayal that finally tipped the scales landed in my lap. By then, I had rebuilt my life. My second business, a streamlined logistics platform with a very different model, was thriving quietly under the radar. I didn't flaunt it, didn't announce acquisitions, didn't put my name on magazine covers. I wanted freedom, not a spotlight. But I was earning more than I ever had with Marcus. Enough to buy a modest home, employ a small, loyal team, and, most importantly, sleep at night knowing my work was mine. Then came the email. It was from a client I'd been working with for nearly 2 years, a warehouse distribution firm run by a practical, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Grant. She and I had built up a strong professional relationship. We had trust, which is why her message hit me like a punch in the chest. Adrian, I regret to inform you we won't be renewing our contract next quarter. Marcus approached us with a competing offer that undercuts your rates by 25%. He also mentioned some concerns about your mental stability and hinted at a history of unreliability. I'm not sure what's true, but given his industry reputation, the board felt safer moving forward with him. I'm sorry, I read that last line 3 times before it fully sank in. He'd done it again. Not just poached a client, but used the same ugly, fabricated narrative he'd spun years ago to undermine me. The idea of him sitting in some sleek office, grinning as he drove the knife in, made my jaw ache from clenching it. For a few hours, I paced my living room, torn between calling Evelyn to set the record straight and doing something far more impulsive. But anger wasn't my weapon, patience was. I sat down, forced myself to breathe, and started connecting dots. Evelyn's company wasn't just any client. They were deeply tied to several major freight hubs. If Marcus had cut a deal with them, he'd either need to offer technology equal to mine, which he didn't have, or promise features that didn't exist yet. And knowing Marcus, that second option was much more likely. The next day, I called a friend who worked in compliance for a mid-tier shipping firm. We'd helped each other out on small things over the years, and I knew he had ears in places Marcus didn't think to watch. I asked him, casually, if he'd heard anything about Marcus's company recently. His voice dropped. Between you and me, there's chatter that he's been moving client data overseas. Not illegal, exactly, but risky. And with the partners he's working with, he trailed off. Let's just say it's a matter of time before it bites him. That was interesting enough. But then, about a week later, I got a call from Maya. Yes, the same developer who'd been with me back in the old days. She'd left Marcus's company the year after I was ousted, and we'd kept loose contact. Her voice was tense. Adrian, I think you need to know this. Marcus is bidding on a government logistics contract. A big one. But here's the thing. He's using some of your old code. The stuff we worked on together. It's buried deep, but I recognized it instantly. My pulse spiked. My original code. The one I'd written years before, back when the company was still mine. I had all the originals, timestamps, and repository logs. If Marcus was repackaging it for a government contract, that meant 2 things. First, he was infringing on my intellectual property. And second, if that code didn't meet updated compliance standards, which it didn't, it could cause catastrophic failures in a system the government depended on. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Marcus wasn't just undercutting me. He was playing with fire, and he had no idea how fast it could burn him. I didn't tip my hand. I thanked Maya, stored every detail she gave me, and started pulling backups from my old drives. Every commit, every changelog, every piece of proof that the foundation of his innovation was mine. And that's when the true emotional turning point arrived. Not a flash of rage, but something colder, steadier. This wasn't about stealing a client anymore. This was about dismantling Marcus's empire from the inside out. And now, for the first time, I had something tangible. The timing would have to be perfect. I need to wait for him to make the next move. The one that would give me a legal opening so wide I could drive a truck through it. I didn't have to wait long. 3 months later, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox, stamped with the seal of the county courthouse. Marcus was suing me for millions in lost profits, claiming that my new business was infringing on his proprietary methods. It was absurd. It was laughable. And it was the biggest mistake he'd ever make. The day I opened that envelope, I knew Marcus had finally crossed the line into outright self-destruction, but I also knew he was about to drag me through hell before I could do anything about it. The lawsuit wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war, wrapped in a smug kind of arrogance only Marcus could muster. He accused me of stealing his exclusive systems, damaging his brand, and poaching his clients. The irony almost made me laugh, but the numbers didn't. He was suing for $3.2 million. My first instinct was to toss it in the shredder and pretend it didn't exist, but the problem was, ignoring it would mean an automatic judgment against me. So I called a lawyer, an old contact from my early days who was as blunt as they came. He skimmed through the documents and let out a low whistle. "This is going to cost you," he said, "even if we win. He's going to bury you in motions and paperwork. You're looking at months, maybe over a year, of this." That was the part that stung. I wasn't broke by any means, but legal fees could bleed you dry faster than a bad investment. I'd worked so hard to build my second business carefully, avoiding risky moves, and now I was staring at the possibility of watching it erode, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my brother decided to throw a tantrum in a courthouse. The next few weeks were brutal. I was juggling client deadlines, endless calls with my lawyer, and the constant, gnawing anxiety that Marcus might win just by outspending me into submission. The stress crept into everything. My appetite vanished. I'd lie awake at night replaying conversations in my head, and even my employees noticed I was quieter, more withdrawn. I didn't tell them what was going on. I didn't want them worrying or thinking the company was in trouble. And of course, Marcus wasn't content to let the court filings do the talking. Word got around, deliberately, I'm sure, that I was being sued for fraud. I lost 2 potential contracts within a month, both citing uncertainty as the reason. My phone became a double-edged sword. Every time it rang, I hoped it was good news, but more often than not, it was another problem. There was one night I'll never forget. It was about 2 a.m., and I was sitting at my desk with a stack of documents, my laptop glowing in the dim light. I'd just finished reviewing yet another motion Marcus's lawyers had filed, something petty and time-wasting, designed to rack up my expenses. My hands were shaking, partly from exhaustion, partly from the sheer weight of it all. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, thought about walking away entirely. Selling the business, leaving the city, disappearing somewhere he couldn't touch me. But then I remembered Maya's voice. The government contract. My old code buried inside his systems. The whispers from my compliance contact about shady overseas deals. And I realized something important. Marcus thought this lawsuit was his way of breaking me. But what he didn't understand was that he had just invited me into a legal arena where all of his skeletons could be dragged into the light. It was the first time in weeks I felt a flicker of control. I started organizing everything I had. Every email, every timestamp backup, every photo, every snippet of information about his questionable partners. Not as a desperate defense, but as the beginnings of something far more dangerous. I stopped pacing the floor at night. I started sleeping again, though my dreams were sharp and calculated. I let Marcus think I was on the defensive, because the longer he believed that, the more reckless he would get. And when the right moment came, I'd be ready to turn all of it against him. What I didn't know yet was that the right moment was coming faster than I'd expected, and it would arrive in the form of a single phone call that changed everything. That phone call came on a Tuesday morning, right when I'd started to settle into the rhythm of balancing my business and the lawsuit. I recognized the number immediately, Evelyn Grant, the client Marcus had stolen from me months earlier. I almost didn't answer. Part of me didn't want to reopen that wound, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was polite, but I could hear something underneath it, a trace of unease. "Adrian," I wanted to reach out. "I know we left things abruptly, and I'm not calling to change our contract situation. But I think you should know. Marcus has missed 2 major deadlines for us. And the last delivery he pushed through? It crashed our tracking system for over a week. My board isn't happy." I could have gloated. I could have said, "Told you so." Instead, I just listened. Evelyn went on to say they were already considering pulling out of their agreement with him, but they couldn't risk downtime during the transition. That was the moment a thought began forming. I didn't need to take Marcus down in one strike. I could let his own failures chip away at him while I positioned myself as the safe, reliable alternative. I ended the call on good terms, promised her nothing, but made a mental note. Marcus's cracks were widening. Over the next month, I worked with quiet precision. I focused on my own clients, delivering ahead of schedule, tightening our security protocols, and even introducing a few features I'd been sitting on for a while, ones I knew Marcus couldn't replicate without my original code. The lawsuit was still draining my time, but the discipline it forced on me had a strange side effect. My operations became leaner, faster, more adaptable. My team noticed the shift, and their confidence in me seemed to double. Meanwhile, I started reconnecting with old industry contacts. Carefully, casually, I'd ask how business was going, mention that I was working on some interesting new projects, and leave it at that. People talked, and word began to spread that I was still very much in the game and thriving. The real turning point came when a former investor from my first company reached out. We hadn't spoken since before Marcus forced me out, but apparently, he'd been keeping tabs on the industry. He told me flat out that he regretted ever backing Marcus over me. "If you're ever looking for capital," he said, "I'm ready to put money behind you. No strings this time." It wasn't just the money, though that was tempting. It was the shift in perception. People who had once believed Marcus's version of events were starting to question it. My quiet competence was beginning to contrast sharply with his flashy instability. At the same time, my lawyer and I were combing through discovery in the lawsuit. We started seeing things Marcus probably assumed no one would notice. Unexplained financial transfers, gaps in project documentation, and discrepancies in licensing agreements. It was all small on its own, but together, it painted a pattern. I wasn't ready to move yet, but I could feel the balance tilting. Marcus was still the one throwing punches, but I was starting to set the arena. The lawsuit had given me a direct line into the inner workings of his company, and soon, I'd have more than just defensive proof. I'd have ammunition. And then, one evening, I got an email from Maya with the subject line, "You're going to want to see this." Attached was a copy of a subcontract agreement between Marcus's company and a shell corporation registered overseas. The signature on the document wasn't his, it was someone else's. Someone I recognized from that charity gala years ago. The moment I saw it, I knew this was the thread. If I pulled on it, the whole sweater would unravel. When I opened Maya's attachment, I sat back in my chair and just stared at the screen for a long moment. The subcontract was between Marcus's company and a foreign entity I'd heard of before, a logistics consultancy operating out of Singapore that was really just a front for funneling contracts and data into shadier hands. And the signature? It belonged to Victor Harrow, the same man I'd seen standing beside Marcus at that charity gala years ago. That connection alone was dangerous for Marcus. But when I looked closer at the terms of the subcontract, my pulse started to quicken. They were moving not just client data but portions of the government contract's software architecture. The same contract Maya had told me included my original code, which meant Marcus wasn't just infringing on my intellectual property. He was potentially violating national security clauses without even realizing the legal gravity of it. I didn't tell Maya how big this was. I just thanked her and asked if she could quietly keep monitoring the development branches she still had access to through an old, overlooked account. She agreed, sending me occasional updates that painted an even clearer picture. Marcus was rushing deliverables, bypassing QA entirely, and quietly shifting his development work to contractors with no clearance. The problem, or the opportunity, was that I couldn't just dump this information into the court records without it looking like I'd gone on some personal vendetta. I needed it to surface naturally, as part of discovery or a chance revelation in the lawsuit, so the judge couldn't ignore it. That meant patience and precision. Around this time, the investor who'd reached out to me earlier called again, this time with a proposition. He had contacts in the government's Procurement Oversight Committee. If I could provide proof that a major contractor was mishandling classified software or subcontracting in violation of security protocols, he could make sure it reached the right eyes, anonymously. I didn't commit yet, but I kept his number close. Then came the break I needed. During a routine exchange of documents in the lawsuit, Marcus's attorneys accidentally included an internal email chain, heavily redacted, but not enough to hide the essentials. In it, a project manager expressed urgent concern about the subcontract with Victor's company, warning that they might not meet compliance checks. Marcus's reply was chillingly casual. "Don't worry about compliance. They'll never look that closely." That was gold, not just for my case, but for the bigger picture. I now had Marcus's own words brushing off a compliance risk tied to a government deal. It wasn't enough to end him on its own, but it was the perfect piece to tie together with what Maya had sent me. So I started building a file. Not a messy pile of gotcha screenshots, but a clean, chronological, bulletproof dossier. Dates, signatures, code repository logs, financial transfers, emails, the subcontract. Everything neatly labeled, cross-referenced, and, most importantly, backed by verifiable sources. My lawyer didn't even know the full scope yet. I wanted this to be my card to play at exactly the right moment. At the same time, I began positioning myself publicly, just enough to make Marcus nervous. I accepted 2 speaking invitations at industry conferences. Nothing flashy, just technical talks on data security and logistics software. But I made sure they were well-attended, well-reviewed, and picked up by a few trade publications. My name was starting to surface again, this time in a context Marcus couldn't easily smear without looking petty. Behind the scenes, I also shored up my own defenses. I had my company's code audited by a third party, documented every client agreement, and even brought in a second lawyer, one with experience in corporate fraud cases. If Marcus tried to escalate, I wanted to be able to pivot from defense to offense in an instant. The more I worked, the calmer I felt. It was like setting up dominoes. Each piece had to be placed just right, and when the time came, I wouldn't need to shove them. I'd just flick one with my finger and watch the whole thing collapse. And then, right on cue, Marcus did exactly what I was hoping for. He filed a motion demanding that I produce all source code related to my current business, claiming it was derivative of his. My lawyer advised fighting it. I told him to let it through, because I knew the moment Marcus's team got their hands on my code, they'd compare it to his and see the differences. And if the court ordered him to produce his own for comparison, the buried pieces of my original code and the traces of that shady subcontract would come spilling into the light. The court granted Marcus's motion to examine my code, and just as I predicted, his lawyers pounced on it like they'd struck gold. They sent over their forensic expert to review my systems, clearly expecting to find stolen fragments they could twist into an infringement claim. I welcomed them in with a polite smile and gave them full, well-organized access. Every file, every log, every timestamp was clean, airtight, and entirely mine. What they didn't realize was that the court order worked both ways. If they wanted to compare my code to theirs, they had to submit their own repository for inspection. My lawyer filed the request that same afternoon. Marcus fought it, of course, filed objections, tried to delay, but the judge wasn't buying it. Within 2 weeks, his code was on a secure drive in the hands of a neutral examiner. That was the moment I sat back and let the trap close, because I already knew what they'd find. The examiner's review was meticulous, and when the preliminary report came back, it was better than I could have scripted. Large portions of Marcus's supposedly proprietary system were copied directly from my original pre-split code, right down to unique comments and function names I'd written years ago. Not only that, but certain modules contained dependencies tied to the subcontract with Victor's overseas shell company, which had no authorization to handle government-related software. My lawyer's eyes widened when he read it. Adrian, this isn't just IP theft. If this gets out, it's a federal contract violation, potentially criminal. I knew, and that was exactly why I'd kept my mouth shut until now. We filed a motion to introduce the findings as part of my defense, attaching only the relevant portions of the examiner's report. It was surgical. No accusations, no dramatic claims, just undeniable facts presented with quiet precision. Marcus's legal team scrambled, trying to discredit the examiner, but the judge ordered a second, independent review. The results matched perfectly. Behind the scenes, I took the next step. I reached out to that investor with government contacts and sent over a distilled, evidence-based packet. Not my entire dossier, just enough to raise the right eyebrows in the oversight committee. I made it clear it was for compliance purposes, not revenge. Let the machinery of bureaucracy do what it does best. Within a month, whispers started circulating. A confidential inquiry had been opened into one of the government's logistics contractors. I didn't need to hear Marcus's name to know who they meant. His tone in court changed, less smug, more clipped. His lawyers started asking for continuances, clearly buying time while they tried to figure out how much trouble he was really in. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. We were in a pre-trial conference, sitting across from each other at a long oak table. Marcus was wearing his usual tailored suit, but his collar was slightly askew, and there was a sheen of sweat on his temple. My lawyer slid a small, sealed envelope across the table to his counsel. Inside was a single USB flash drive, labeled only with the date and a case number. His attorney opened it, glanced at the contents, and froze. I watched the color drain from Marcus's face as his lawyer leaned in and whispered something. The judge, curious, asked what it contained. Marcus's lawyer hesitated, then handed it over. The judge plugged it into the court's secure laptop, brows furrowing as he scrolled through the files. Then, slowly, he looked up. "Do they realize what's on here?" he asked, his voice measured. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, leaned back in my chair, and waited. The judge's question hung in the air for a beat too long. Marcus shifted in his seat, his confident facade cracking just enough for me to see the panic behind his eyes. His lawyer cleared his throat and tried to suggest a private discussion, but the judge shook his head. "This is relevant to the case and to the integrity of a federal contract. I'm ordering it entered into the record." What followed was a slow-motion collapse. The flash drive contained the examiner's report, the subcontract with Victor's shell company, and repository logs showing my original code woven into Marcus's system, all tied neatly to the government contract. The judge didn't shout or gloat. He simply set a hearing to determine whether the matter should be referred to federal authorities. The way he said "referred" made it sound less like a possibility and more like a certainty. Marcus's composure melted over the next weeks. In court, he stopped smirking. He stopped looking me in the eye altogether. Outside the courtroom, I started hearing from industry contacts that clients were quietly pulling out of deals with him, citing compliance concerns. Evelyn, the client he'd stolen from me, sent me a short but telling message. "He's finished." The federal inquiry moved fast, faster than I'd expected. Agents seized company records. Victor disappeared from the country overnight. By the time the court date for my lawsuit rolled around again, Marcus was facing not only the dismissal of his case against me, but the very real prospect of criminal charges for fraud and contract violations. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor without hesitation. Marcus's claims were baseless, his evidence non-existent, and the counterclaims my lawyer filed left him on the hook for my legal fees. The number wasn't small. Neither was the damage to his reputation. His company's stock, privately held but still tracked by industry reports, was valued at less than half of what it had been 6 months earlier. The last time I saw him in person was in the courthouse hallway after the final hearing. He looked smaller somehow, as if the sharp edges of his confidence had been worn down. He opened his mouth like he might say something, but I just walked past him, my steps steady, my head high. A month later, I heard he'd sold what was left of the company to cover debts and avoid total bankruptcy. The irony was almost poetic. He'd taken my business from me, only to destroy his own by building it on stolen foundations. I never reached out. There was nothing left to say. One rainy evening, long after it was all over, I found myself at my desk again. Same desk, different man. I opened the drawer where I'd kept that flash drive, turned it over in my hand, and thought about all the years I'd waited for this moment. Then I placed it back inside, shut the drawer, and whispered to the empty room, "Checkmate." You ever have that one moment where someone says something so out of line, so loaded with resentment, that you just sit there in stunned silence, thinking, did they really just say that to me? Yeah, that was me 3 weeks ago, staring across the kitchen table at my older brother as he smirked like he hadn't just insulted me in the most backhanded way possible. I'm Nathan, by the way, 33, single, software engineer, and apparently the villain of my family's latest drama, because I didn't bankrupt myself cleaning up someone else's mess. But we'll get there. Let me back up a little. I'm the youngest of 3. My sister, Kara, is 37, a nurse with 2 kids and a tendency to always be broke. My brother, Jake, is 39, the golden boy growing up, the athlete, the charmer, the one mom and dad would move mountains for if he even hinted at needing something. I was the quiet one, the nerd, as Jake liked to say. The one who liked books more than football and had a knack for solving problems, unless that problem involved navigating my family's emotional minefields. Our parents passed away 2 years ago, 6 months apart. Dad had a heart attack, and Mom, well, she just sort of gave up after that. I was the one who handled everything: funeral arrangements, estate paperwork, the will. And when it came time to divide things, it was messy, as you can probably imagine. There was a house, some savings, and an investment portfolio that Dad had built up quietly over the years. Nothing mind-blowing, but solid. Jake wanted the house. Kara wanted a payout to help with her mortgage. I was fine with either, as long as we split things fairly. But it didn't play out like that. Jake insisted on taking the house and offered to buy us out, with money he hadn't even secured yet. Kara took her third in cash. I walked away with my share in assets, not cash, Dad's portfolio, which I managed carefully and even grew. Fast forward to last month. Jake, who never made good on that buyout, had refinanced the house twice, racked up a ton of debt, and then, in a move so dumb it almost felt like performance art, blew the last of his inheritance. Money he borrowed against the house, on a brand new car. A stupidly expensive one, too. I'm talking bright red, V8 engine, midlife crisis kind of car. When I heard about it, I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. It was such a Jake move. So you can imagine my shock when he showed up uninvited at my place last weekend, looking like someone who had just realized Vegas doesn't always let you win. Kara was with him too, kids in tow, like they were staging some kind of family intervention in my living room. I should have known something was up the second they both brought Starbucks. Must be nice being rich while we're drowning in bills, Jake said, slouching into my couch like he owned the place. That's what started it. I blinked. What? You heard me, he said, grinning like it was a joke, except there wasn't an ounce of humor in his voice. While we're out here struggling, you're sitting on a gold mine Dad left you. It's not a gold mine, I replied, keeping my voice even. It's a retirement plan. And you had your third. Yeah, he scoffed, and I used it. Things are hard right now. Interest rates, gas, food, everything's through the roof. We could use some help. I repeated, glancing at Kara. She looked down at her coffee cup. Jake leaned forward, elbows on knees. Look, I know we've had our differences, but we're family. You're in a position to help. You've always been the smart one, the saver. You don't even have kids. What are you hoarding it all for? I stared at him, genuinely speechless. The audacity. The total lack of accountability. I'm not hoarding anything, I said finally. I'm just not bailing you out because you made bad choices. That's when he muttered it. Low, like it was under his breath, but loud enough that I'd hear. Must be nice being rich while we're drowning in bills. I didn't even respond. I just stood up, walked to the door, and held it open. Kara looked conflicted, like she wanted to say something, but instead she ushered her kids up and out, mumbling, "Thanks for the coffee," like this was just a casual visit and not an ambush. Jake walked out last, flashing that smug grin again. "You'll come around," he said, like I was the one being unreasonable. 2 hours later, I got a text from Mom's old number. My stomach dropped when I saw it, like some ghost from the past had reached through the phone. But it wasn't her. It was Kara. She'd saved Mom's contact and was using it now to guilt-trip me. "Help him out," the message read. "Or don't bother visiting for the holidays." I stared at it for a long time. It was like a punch to the gut, not just because of the ultimatum, but because they used her number to deliver it. Like weaponizing grief. Like saying, "Mom would have wanted you to do this," even though Mom never once asked me to clean up their messes. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number. And then I blocked Kara. And then Jake. That night, I put my phone on silent and went to bed early, feeling a strange mix of guilt, anger, and, if I'm being honest, a little peace. Like I had finally drawn a line in the sand. I wasn't the bank. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't their punching bag. But when I woke up the next morning, I had 53 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and, this one was the kicker, a Venmo request from my sister. $2,000. Caption, "For Jake's car payment. Don't be selfish." That was when I realized they weren't just desperate. They were entitled, and they weren't going to stop. Not unless I made them. You'd think after getting bombarded with 53 missed calls in one night, after being told not to bother coming home for the holidays, after being called selfish for not paying off a car I didn't buy, I'd be angry. But I wasn't. Not at first. That morning, as I stood in my kitchen with a steaming mug of coffee in my hand, phone screen lighting up again and again with new messages, I just felt tired. Not sleepy tired, but bone-deep weary. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even notice until now. I didn't open any of the voicemails. I didn't respond to the Venmo request. I didn't even check who the calls were from. I already knew. And I had nothing to say? Not yet. Instead, I got dressed, went to work like usual, sat through meetings, squinted at code, and answered Slack messages while the notifications kept piling up. By lunch, I had 68 missed calls and 4 more Venmo requests, each one more insulting than the last. One even had a waving emoji and the message, "TikTok, Nathan." TikTok? Like I was on some kind of countdown? Like they were threatening me? That's when the switch flipped. You ever have one of those moments where the fog lifts? Where every memory, every injustice, every bite you held back comes rushing forward like a freight train, and suddenly, finally, you're just done. That was me. Because it wasn't just about the car. It wasn't even about the money. It was about years. Decades, honestly. A lifetime of playing second string to Jake, of being told to be the bigger person, of swallowing every slight to keep the peace. And now they were framing me as the villain because I refused to burn my financial future for someone who never respected me? Nah, not this time. That night, I called Kara. Not because I was ready to reconcile, but because I wanted answers. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting, phone in hand. "Nathan," she said, her voice already edged with exasperation. "Finally. Why are you using Mom's number to text me?" I asked. Calm. Direct. She didn't skip a beat. "Because you never respond to anything else. I figured it would get your attention." Yeah, it got my attention. It also felt manipulative. "Oh please," she snapped. "You're being dramatic. You told me not to come home for Christmas." She scoffed. "Well, maybe if you acted like family." "Like family?" I cut in. "You mean, send Jake money so he can keep driving around in that toy he bought with a second mortgage?" "It's not a toy. He needs that car to get to work." "What work, Kara?" "Last I heard, he quit his job at the dealership because they didn't respect him." A long silence. "He's trying, Nathan." "No," I said. "He's failing. Repeatedly. And you're enabling it. Both of you are." She exploded then. "Oh, get off your high horse. Not everyone had it easy like you." I actually laughed. "Easy? You think I had it easy? You think working 60-hour weeks in my 20s to afford night classes and pay rent while Jake lived at home rent-free was easy? Or watching Mom and Dad cover his bills while telling me I was too independent for my own good?" Silence again. I could practically hear her fuming. "You've always been jealous of him," she said quietly. That one stopped me cold. "Jealous?" I repeated. "You hate that Mom and Dad loved him more." There it was. The truth. The thing I'd suspected for years, but no one had ever said out loud. And Kara said it like it was a fact, like I was some petty little brother still chasing approval. "I don't hate it," I said slowly. "I accepted it a long time ago. What I hate is being punished for not being the failure." She didn't respond. "I'm done," I told her. "No more texts. No more calls. I'm not your safety net." And I hung up. That should have been the end of it. But of course it wasn't. 2 days later, I got a notification from my bank. Someone had tried to log into my account. 3 failed password attempts before it locked them out. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, trying to process what I was looking at. I'd set up 2-factor authentication, so I knew nothing had been breached. But still, someone had tried. And it wasn't a coincidence. I checked my email next. Sure enough, buried between newsletters and work updates, there it was, a password reset request. Not from me. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started going through my security logs. Whoever it was didn't get far, but the IP address was familiar. Suspiciously familiar. I opened my saved locations and compared. It was Jake's town. I didn't want to believe it. Not really. But when I checked my Venmo history and saw that Kara had sent herself $10 from me a week ago, just to test if I'd notice, apparently, it confirmed everything. They weren't just entitled. They were dangerous. And they had crossed a line. Still, part of me thought maybe this was the low point. Maybe after being shut out, they'd finally back off. Maybe they'd take the hint and move on. But no. A week later, I went to pick up a package from my front porch and saw something stuck to my door. It was a handwritten note, taped right under the peephole. Messy, angry scrawl. "You're not better than us. Don't forget where you came from." No signature. But I didn't need one. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about every time I'd let something slide. Every holiday where I let Jake take the biggest slice of ham. Every birthday where Kara gave me a half-hearted gift and expected praise. Every time I offered to help with bills, to fix their laptops, to babysit, to lend a couch, to drive them home, to smile through passive-aggressive digs. And then I remembered something from years ago. Something that suddenly clicked into place like a puzzle piece I didn't know was missing. It was right after Dad died. We were all sitting in the lawyer's office, going over the will. At the time, it didn't seem weird. The lawyer had asked if we'd all reviewed the document. Kara and Jake nodded. I said I hadn't seen it yet. He looked surprised. Your brother and sister said they showed you the draft last month. I had frowned, confused. They didn't. Jake jumped in. Oh, we must have forgotten. Sorry, man. At the time, I'd been too distracted by grief to press it. But now I saw it for what it was. They had reviewed the will before I ever saw it. They had access. And they'd known about the clauses. The money. The stocks. The distribution plan. All of it. And now I wondered, what else did they see? Did they know about the secondary trust account Dad set up for emergencies? The one I had to jump through hoops to claim, thinking I was the only one with knowledge of it? Or the letter Dad had written me, handwritten, not typed, saying how proud he was that I had made a life for myself without ever asking for anything? Did they read it? Did they resent it? The next morning, I called my lawyer. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was theft, harassment, attempted fraud. And if I didn't do something, it would get worse. I filed a report about the unauthorized Venmo transfer and the login attempts. Then I asked my lawyer to dig deeper into the estate documents, just in case. 2 days later, I got a call. You might want to sit down, he said. Apparently, a few weeks before Dad's death, Jake had tried to convince the estate manager to alter the will. Nothing major, just some minor rewording, supposedly to clarify language. But the lawyer had flagged it as suspicious and rejected the request. The version we all saw was the original, untouched. But Jake had tried. And the kicker? Kara had signed off on it. Not only that, but the lawyer sent me a copy of the draft Jake submitted. In it, the portfolio, my share, was reassigned to a joint family emergency fund, with Jake as primary executor. If that change had gone through, I'd be broke right now. I stared at the draft in disbelief, hands shaking. This wasn't just about entitlement anymore. This was betrayal. And it was calculated. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about what I was going to do next. I felt focused, clear, because now I had evidence. And they had no idea what was coming. Rock bottom doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, like a cold draft you don't notice at first, until your fingers are numb and you realize the window's been open for days. That was me, about a month after the will incident. The betrayal, the lies. The draft document Jake and Kara tried to slip under the radar like a virus buried in code. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that fire-in-your-chest way. I was just hollow, detached, like I'd stepped out of my own life and was watching from a distance. I'd wake up, drag myself to work, push code around like it was just pixels and syntax, eat something bland for dinner, scroll aimlessly through Netflix, and sleep. If you could call it sleep. Some nights I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the last few months in my head like a bad rerun. Other nights, I'd dream about my parents. Vivid, strange dreams where they were still alive, but slightly off. Like they knew something they weren't telling me. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the weight of it. The realization that for years, I'd convinced myself I was part of something. A family. Only to find out I was the fallback plan. The wallet. The outsider who got called selfish for not offering up his spine to be walked on. And then there was the silence. The kind that fills the void after you've cut people off. No more birthday texts from Kara. No more obligatory check-ins from Jake. Not even a hey, are you alive? From any cousins, uncles, aunts. Most of whom had long ago taken sides in the invisible civil war of our family. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. Loyalty in our family was always transactional. If you didn't offer something, money, sympathy, excuses, you weren't worth much. So yeah, that was the fall. Not a crash, but a quiet, lonely slide into numbness. But here's the thing about hitting bottom. You find out what's solid, what doesn't break. And slowly, very slowly, I started to realize something. I was still standing. Not because I was some stoic warrior or had some grand epiphany. Honestly, it started with something small. Stupid, even. A houseplant. My coworker Sarah, who sat 2 desks away, gifted me a snake plant for my birthday. Low maintenance, she said. Like you. I chuckled, took it home, and stuck it on my windowsill. A week later, it was still alive. 2 weeks, still green. A month, thriving. I hadn't kept anything alive in years. But this little plant? It didn't need much. Just a bit of sun, a sip of water, and it grew. Quietly. Persistently. Kind of like me. That was the first shift. Then came the gym. I'd never been a fitness guy. Jake was always the athletic one. But something about the silence in my apartment, the lack of distraction, the emptiness, it made me restless. So one night, around 10 p.m., I grabbed my old sneakers and walked to the 24-hour gym near my place. I didn't go in with some Rocky-style training montage in mind. I just got on the treadmill and walked. 15 minutes. Then 20. Then a light jog. The next night, I did it again. Then again. And soon, it became my new ritual. An hour on the treadmill. A few sets on the weight machines. Nothing extreme. Just motion. Breath. Reclaiming control over my own body. Week by week, I started feeling lighter. Not physically at first, but mentally. The static in my brain started to fade. I began sleeping again, deep, dreamless sleep that left me clearer in the mornings. I ate better. Less takeout, more cooking. If you haven't tried pan-searing salmon with garlic butter, do it. Life-changing. And then, maybe 2 months into this quiet rebuild, something unexpected happened. My boss pulled me into a private Zoom meeting. "Nathan," she said, smiling in that cautious way managers do when they're about to drop news, "I've been reviewing your work over the past quarter. You've really leveled up lately." I blinked. "Oh, your code's cleaner. Your problem-solving is sharper. Your last security audit caught a bug that saved us weeks of backtracking. We're moving you to lead on the new back-end migration." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't even realized anyone noticed. "Oh, and," she added, "we're bumping your salary. 20% raise." I smiled. Genuinely. "Thanks." But inside, I was stunned. While Jake was defaulting on loans and Kara was sending passive-aggressive Venmo requests, I quietly climbed out of the hole they threw me into and built something stronger. Something mine. And yet, the part of me that had grown up in their shadow, the part that still half expected to be shamed for winning, couldn't quite celebrate. Until the wedding invite arrived. Yes, a wedding. Not Jake's. Not Kara's. One of our second cousins. Someone I barely knew but had seen once a year at awkward Thanksgiving gatherings. The kind of person who'd always say, "Hey man, we should hang out sometime," and then never follow up. The invite came in a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. Very fancy. Very much, look how successful I am energy. But it wasn't the wedding that caught my attention. It was the RSVP list attached, and the fact that Kara and Jake were both on it, and the handwritten note from the bride at the bottom. "Would love to see you there, Nathan. Everyone's talking about how well you're doing. Would be great to catch up." I stared at that note for a long time. Everyone's talking? Interesting. Because as far as I knew, no one had heard from me in months. Turns out, someone had. My LinkedIn profile. My GitHub projects. Even a Medium post I wrote about software architecture had started gaining traction. I wasn't just rebuilding quietly anymore. I was rising. And they noticed. I RSVP'd yes. Not to flaunt anything, but because I wanted to see, really see, how they'd look me in the eye after everything. I started preparing. Not just my outfit, charcoal gray suit, black tie, sleek dress shoes that made me feel taller than my 5 feet 10 inches frame, but my mindset. I wasn't going to show up bitter. I wasn't going to throw their failures in their face. I was going to walk in like someone who had nothing to prove. And for the first time in years, that was true. A week before the wedding, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Kara. "Are you going to the wedding?" No, hey. No small talk. Just straight to the point. I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, another text. "Please don't make a scene. It's not the time." Oh, so now she was worried I would make a scene. Interesting. I still didn't respond. Then, the night before the wedding, I got a message on Facebook from Jake. "We should talk before tomorrow. Things got out of hand. Let's just be cool." Cool. Cool like the time he tried to rewrite the will. Cool like the time he let Kara threaten me with our dead mother's number. I ignored him, too. And that silence? It was power. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. But I could feel the pieces aligning. The momentum shifting. And at the wedding, surrounded by people who once saw me as the quiet brother, the weird one, the nerd, I was going to show them just how wrong they were. Not with arrogance, but with presence. With poise. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's evolution. But of course, Jake and Kara didn't like that one bit. Especially when they realized what was really coming. And they still had no idea how far I was willing to go. The wedding was held at a country estate just outside the city, one of those sprawling places with manicured lawns, ivy-covered arches, and enough fairy lights to make your eyes ache. I arrived fashionably late, alone, walking up the gravel path in my tailored suit and polished shoes, my hands tucked calmly into my coat pockets. A valet took my keys without looking twice. For once, I blended into the world I'd quietly built, not the family I came from. The ceremony had already wrapped. The bride and groom were off taking pictures in a sun-drenched garden, and the guests were milling around the cocktail tables on the terrace, sipping wine and catching up. I could feel the looks before I saw them. Those half-second glances, the murmured recognition. A few people came up with polite smiles, asking what I'd been up to, commenting vaguely about how they'd heard things. I nodded, answered vaguely, and scanned the crowd. Then I saw them. Jake and Kara, standing under a white tent near the champagne table. She wore a navy blue dress, too tight at the sleeves. He was in a suit that didn't quite fit right. Expensive, sure, but clearly borrowed or rented. He had that familiar smug tilt to his chin, the one he always wore when he thought the room owed him something. They hadn't seen me yet. I took a breath, adjusted my cufflinks, and walked toward them. Kara spotted me first. Her smile was brittle. She stepped forward like she might actually hug me, but I stopped short and offered a hand instead. She hesitated, then took it. "Nathan," she said carefully, as if testing the word. "Nice night," I replied. Jake didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me with this unreadable look, like he couldn't decide whether to play cool or play victim. Then he smirked. "You clean up well." I smiled. "I always did. You just never noticed." That landed harder than I expected. His smile faltered. Kara glanced between us like she was expecting fireworks, but I wasn't here to explode. "Not yet. I've got a table near the back," I said. "You two sitting with the family?" "Of course," Kara said. "Front and center." "Of course." Still clinging to proximity like it meant something. We made a little small talk, awkward, stilted, mostly for show, until the dinner bell rang. I excused myself and walked to my seat, but I didn't touch the wine. I needed a clear head. Tonight wasn't just about presents. It was recon. Because weddings? Weddings are like intel gold mines. Everyone lets their guard down. And sure enough, over the course of the next few hours, I learned more than I expected. From a tipsy cousin, I found out Jake had been rejected for a business loan 2 weeks ago. His credit too low, his collateral tapped out. From another relative, I overheard that Kara's husband had walked out 3 months ago, and she'd been hiding it, claiming he was working nights. I kept smiling, nodding, soaking it in, because what they didn't realize was that I hadn't come to the wedding to mend bridges. I came to confirm what I already suspected. They were crumbling, and all I had to do was give them a gentle push. The next week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went back to our childhood home, not to visit, not to reminisce, to inspect. See, when Dad passed, Jake had insisted on keeping the house. Claimed he wanted to keep it in the family. Said it would be his kids one day. He doesn't have kids. He promised to pay us each our share, and when he didn't, he talked us into letting him refinance to get things in order. Well, turns out he refinanced twice, missed payments, and now the place was barely holding together. The siding was cracked, the lawn overgrown. A for sale sign stood in the yard, half fallen, like even the sign had given up. I parked across the street and just watched for a while. No one came in. No one went out. The windows were dark. Then I pulled out my phone and called a friend of mine, Mark. He was a real estate agent who owed me a favor from years back when I helped him build his firm's app for free. "Remember that project I did for you?" I asked. Mark laughed. "Still the best client dashboard we've ever had. I'm calling in the favor." "Name it. I want to know everything about 1221 Parkwood Lane." He whistled. "That's your folks' old place, right?" "Used to be. Just send me the mortgage details, liens, current listing agent, everything." "You got it. Give me a day." While I waited on Mark, I turned to Kara. Well, indirectly. I logged into a private Reddit account I hadn't used in years, found a couple of parenting subreddits, and searched her name. Nothing. Then I searched her husband's name. Jackpot. Buried deep in a venting post from a user whose account had been inactive for months was a confession from a man whose wife's family treated him like a walking wallet. He didn't name Kara, but the details lined up. The 2 kids. The timing of the separation. The reference to her parasite brother. So Jack had left. and she'd been lying about it. With that, I reached out to a private investigator. Not to dig up dirt, per se, just to confirm the timelines. Employment status, custody filings, debt trails. Because if I was going to pull the trigger on this, I needed to be sure. Every step, every move, I was building something. Not revenge in the dramatic, movie sense. No loud confrontations. No screaming matches. I was setting a stage, and they wouldn't even realize they were standing on it. When Mark called back, he sounded breathless. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Try me. Your brother's listed the house at $90,000 above market value. It's been sitting for months. He's rejected 3 offers. Why? Because, get this, he's trying to flip it. He did some cosmetic updates last year, ran out of money, and now he's banking on a desperate buyer who won't ask too many questions." I rubbed my eyes. And the mortgage? Balloon loan. His second refinance was interest only. Payments just jumped 70%. He's drowning, man. Exactly what I needed to hear. "What about the deed?" I asked. Mark hesitated. "That's the weird part. He never took your names off it." I sat up straight. "What? Your name and Kara's? Still on the title. It was never updated after probate. Legally, all 3 of you still co-own the property. That changed everything. Because if my name was still on that deed, Jake couldn't sell a damn thing without my signature. He'd built his last lifeline on a foundation he didn't own. And now, I could pull the rug out from under him. But I wasn't done. I needed leverage on Kara, too. Something that would keep her from swooping in to mediate once Jake started drowning. That's when the PI came through. A tidy little report, 8 pages long. Kara was $37,000 in credit card debt, living paycheck to paycheck. Her husband had filed for full custody and wasn't answering her calls. The apartment she'd just moved into, lease co-signed by their old babysitter, because Kara didn't meet the income threshold on her own. I filed all this away, because soon, they were going to come knocking again. Desperate people always do. So I prepared. I pulled my investments from passive index funds and reallocated some of them into short-term high-liquidity accounts, ready to move at a moment's notice. I set up a trust under a shell name. I hired an estate lawyer to quietly begin drafting a motion to partition the property Jake was squatting in. And then, I waited. Just like I knew they would, the storm arrived the next week. Jake called, block number, of course. I let it go to voicemail. Then came Kara. Her message was breathless. "Nathan, Jake's in trouble. He could lose the house. He says you've got some legal claim on it. Please don't do this. Just call me." Ah, so now they knew. Good. But I didn't reply. Not yet. I wanted them to stew. To feel what it was like to be locked out of your own escape route. To sit in the same silence they'd left me in. Meanwhile, I kept preparing, lining up calls with realtors, quietly alerting the bank that I would not be authorizing a sale or refinance, reviewing every clause in the will to ensure airtight leverage. And then I made one final call to a podcast host, not a huge name, but one with a decent following, a show about family finance, inheritance, and the messes people leave behind. The host had once interviewed a friend of mine about estate abuse and financial manipulation. I pitched him a story. No names, no locations, just a case study of what happens when the black sheep turns out to be the backbone and decides to stop being used. He loved it. We recorded the episode under pseudonyms. It went live a week later. And let's just say, the timing was perfect. Because by then, Jake was knocking at my door. Literally. And he was about to find out just how far I'd gone. But he still hadn't seen the final move. The one that would change everything. And take everything he thought he had left. Jake showed up at my door just before 9 p.m., wearing that same gray hoodie he used to wear back in high school. Back when he still thought he was invincible. He knocked like he didn't care whether I answered, but he lingered like he knew he had no other options. I let him stand there for a few more knocks before I opened the door. His smile was weak. Not smug, not charming, just tired. And desperate. "Nate," he said, eyes darting behind me like he expected backup. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside without saying a word and gestured to the couch. He sat, leaned forward, elbows on knees like he had at my place months ago, only this time the air was heavier. He looked smaller somehow, like the years of coasting were finally catching up to him. "Look, I know we've had our differences," he started. I stayed silent. "But things are really bad, man. The house. If I miss one more payment, they're taking it." I nodded like I was listening. I was, but not in the way he hoped. I wasn't there to empathize. He went on, rambling about how the market tanked and contractors overcharged him and the bank moved the goalposts. Every excuse in the book. He never once admitted he'd messed up. I just need time, he said finally. That's all. Just don't block the sale, and I'll pay you back after the close. You'll get your third, maybe more. I smiled faintly and walked to my kitchen. Poured 2 glasses of water. Brought one to him. You still think you're in charge, don't you? Jake blinked. What? You think this is a negotiation? That you still hold the cards? But you don't, Jake. You haven't for a while. He stiffened. What are you talking about? I reached into a drawer and pulled out a file folder, thick with documents, reports, screenshots. I tossed it onto the coffee table. That's a full timeline of everything you and Kara tried to do. The fake draft of the will, the mortgage fraud, the Venmo scam, Kara's little stunt with Mom's phone number, even the login attempts on my bank account. He didn't touch the folder. I leaned back, arms crossed. See, Jake, you thought you were running a hustle, that I'd always bail you out like the smart little brother who'd eventually cave. But I stopped playing that role. His jaw tightened. What do you want? I smiled. There it is. I let the silence stretch before answering. I want the house, I said. All of it. You sign your share and Kara's over to me. Clean. No money owed to either of you. I take over the mortgage. I fix it up. I sell it or rent it or burn it to the ground. Doesn't matter. It's mine. Jake looked like I'd slapped him. No way. Then you default, I said simply, and lose it anyway. But instead of walking away clean, you get evicted. Your credit tanks. You get sued for damages and owe back taxes you can't pay. And Kara? She gets dragged in too, because her name's still on the deed. Jake's breath hitched. You'd really do that to your own brother? You tried to steal from me, I said coldly. Twice. You used Mom's death as leverage. You let Kara guilt me while you burned through the inheritance. You tried to rewrite the will, Jake. His eyes flickered. He knew I wasn't bluffing. I leaned forward. But I'll make it easy. I've already drafted the quitclaim deeds. All you have to do is sign. I'll handle the rest. And what if Kara doesn't agree? I smirked. She already did. That part wasn't technically true, yet. But earlier that day, I'd had my lawyer send her a letter. It included the PI report, her financials, Jack's custody filings, screenshots from forums showing her rants about being abandoned, and a gentle reminder that her name being on a failing mortgage meant she could be personally sued for breach of contract. Along with the letter was an offer. Sign over the house to me in exchange for full release of liability and no public exposure. Her lawyer called back an hour later. She agreed. I slid the signed form across the table to Jake. Just need yours now. He stared at the paper for a long time. Then at me. You've changed, he said bitterly. No, I said. I just stopped pretending. He signed. Within a week, the house was mine. I didn't throw a party. I didn't brag online. I didn't even tell anyone in the family. Instead, I got to work. Hired a real contractor. Not Jake's buddy, who cut corners and left drywall unfinished. I poured a chunk of my savings into making the place livable again. Fixed the plumbing. Rewired the entire kitchen. Installed solar panels. Ripped out the moldy carpet and laid down hardwood that practically glowed in the sunlight. By the time I was done, the house didn't just look better. It felt better. Lighter. Like it had finally been freed from decades of rot. Emotional and physical. And then I sold it. Market was up. Interest rates had leveled. I got 3 offers in the first week, all above asking. When the deal closed, I sat on my balcony that night with a beer in hand and watched the sunset, phone in my lap. Then I sent 2 texts. To Kara, house sold. You're free of the debt. Your kids deserve a better role model than you've been. I hope you figure that out before they start to resent you too. To Jake, you spent your whole life trying to be the favorite. All I wanted was peace. Now I have it. And you? You've got nothing left to steal. Neither of them replied. But the next day, a friend forwarded me a link to an episode of the podcast I'd been on. Apparently, it had gone viral. Comments flooded in. People sharing their own stories of family betrayal, of siblings who felt entitled, of toxic parents, twisted wills, and long overdue boundaries. It was like a collective exhale from people who finally felt seen. Someone even posted, "Whoever Nathan is in this story, thank you. I needed this." I didn't comment. I didn't reply, but I saved that post. Because that's what revenge really is. Not flame and fury. It's walking away from the wreckage with your head held high, while the people who lit the match choke on the smoke. And as for me, I'm done building bridges. Now I build walls. With windows. So I can watch the ones who tried to burn me fall apart from the outside. Final line. I stopped being the family's backup plan and became the blueprint they'll never follow. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. I'm Edward, 29, and if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you there was nothing better than the smell of turkey in the oven, the chaotic energy of relatives arguing about cranberry sauce versus jelly, and the simple tradition of everyone sitting around the table. I loved it so much that I always volunteered to host. I'd get up at 5 a.m. to prep the bird. I'd spend days before cleaning my house, and I'd triple-check every recipe so that when my family walked in, everything felt warm and perfect. But last year changed everything. It started with a weird group text. My mom sent out the usual Thanksgiving dinner at Edwards for PM message, but this time she added, "Everyone bring your appetite. This year will be special." I brushed it off at first. Maybe she meant she was bringing a new dessert recipe or something. But then my cousin Lauren replied, "Oh, I can't wait. This is going to be juicy." And my sister, Claire, just sent a laughing emoji. Something about it made my stomach twist. Over the next few days, I started noticing little comments from family members that didn't sit right. Claire called me and asked if I was ready for a little surprise. My uncle texted me a gif of a turkey running away with the caption, "Better not skip dinner." Even my dad, who usually just shows up, eat, and leaves, told me he hoped I wouldn't get too sensitive this year. Sensitive? About what? At first, I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to focus on the food, telling myself that if I made the meal flawless, nothing could ruin the day. I marinated the turkey overnight, tried a new stuffing recipe, and even baked 2 different pies because last year someone complained that I only had pumpkin. I wanted everything perfect. The day before Thanksgiving, though, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some extra folding chairs. They weren't home, but my stepmom, Carol, was there with her phone on speaker. She was talking to Claire, and they didn't realize I had walked in. Carol said, "Oh, it's going to be perfect. Everyone will be there, and he won't even see it coming. He needs to be humbled a little." Claire laughed. "Exactly. He thinks he's better than everyone with his house and his job and his perfect Thanksgiving. This will put him in his place. And after we say it, we're finally kicking him out of the family chat." I froze in the hallway, gripping the chairs so hard my knuckles turned white. I felt my ears burning. They were planning something at my house, in front of the whole family, and they were planning to humiliate me. I stepped back quietly before they noticed I was there. I set the chairs down in the garage and left without saying a word. My heart was pounding the whole drive home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every possible scenario played out in my head. Were they going to bring up something from my past? Some embarrassing story? Were they going to criticize me in front of everyone? Was it going to be about the fact that I hadn't brought a date to Thanksgiving in 3 years? I kept replaying Carol's words. He needs to be humbled. The next morning, I was supposed to start cooking at dawn. Instead, I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the raw turkey, my phone buzzing with messages from family members confirming what they were bringing. For the first time ever, I didn't feel excited about Thanksgiving. I felt like I was walking into a trap, and that's when I made a decision that changed everything. I wish I could say that I snapped out of it, shook off the feeling, and went back to basting turkeys like a happy little chef. But no, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the quiet house around me. It felt wrong. The kitchen that usually buzzed with excitement the day before Thanksgiving was still. The utensils, the serving trays, the spices lined up in order. They all just seemed like props for someone else's play now. Around 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, overly cheerful. "You got the turkey in the oven yet?" I hesitated. "Not yet. Still getting things prepped." "Well, don't be late this year," she said quickly, almost like she was nervous. "We want to get started right on time. Everyone's very excited about this year's dinner." "Right?" I said, my throat dry. "Excited." She hung up before I could ask anything else. That single word, excited, was starting to sound like a threat. By noon, I convinced myself to at least start some prep work. If nothing else, I told myself, I didn't want to give them another reason to complain about me. So I cleaned the turkey, chopped vegetables, and made a timeline on the fridge with sticky notes. But something was different this year. Usually I had music playing, singing along to some classic rock, but this time I cooked in silence. Every little sound, the clink of a knife on the cutting board, the timer on the oven, felt loud. Then my sister Claire called. "Hey, chef," she said in that sing-song voice she uses when she's mocking me. "Hope you're ready for tonight. We have a special announcement planned." "An announcement?" I asked carefully. "Oh yeah," she said, clearly grinning on the other end. "But don't worry, you'll get to be front and center for it." I didn't answer, and she must have taken my silence as discomfort because she added, "Hey, don't get all serious. It's just family fun. You take things way too personally." I forced a laugh and said, "Right. Family fun." But when we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at my reflection in the microwave door, and my stomach twisted again. Family fun. My family's version of fun had always been a little sharp. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the kid who got good grades, cleaned up after everyone, and made sure my younger cousins didn't burn the house down. And for some reason, that made me the default punchline. I was the one who got teased about being uptight, about never being spontaneous, about trying too hard. I learned to laugh it off, but there's only so many years you can take being the family punching bag before you start to wonder if maybe you really are too much. By 3 p.m., my kitchen was full of the smells of Thanksgiving, garlic, butter, rosemary, but I couldn't enjoy it. My phone kept lighting up with messages from the family group chat. My aunt sent a picture of a wine bottle with the caption, "We're bringing the good stuff. We'll all need it tonight," followed by a laughing emoji. My cousin wrote, "Can't wait for the show." The show. That word made my chest tighten. Then, as if the universe wanted to drive the point home, I got a call from my dad. He doesn't usually call on his own. It's almost always my mom or Carol, so my stomach sank as soon as I saw his name. "Hey, Dad," I said cautiously. "Edward," he said. His tone was almost businesslike. "I just wanted to remind you, tonight's important. Don't make a scene." "A scene?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Why would I make a scene?" He sighed. "Just keep your cool. You tend to get defensive, and we don't want any drama this year." I bit back 100 responses and finally said, "Got it. No drama." But the call left me rattled. Why was he warning me not to get defensive unless they knew I'd have a reason to be? By late afternoon, my house looked perfect. Candles on the mantel, table set with the good china, food warm in the oven. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was some sort of stage they were walking into, and I was the unwilling main act. The first to arrive was my stepmom, Carol. She walked in with a smug smile and didn't even bother to say hello before heading straight to the kitchen. She said, lifting the lid off one of my serving dishes. "Smells good. At least you got this part right." "This part?" I asked. "Oh, you know what I mean," she said with a wave of her hand, already pulling out her phone to snap pictures of the table. "The food. You always do that well. It's the rest of it that we'll see about." I stood frozen for a moment, holding the carving knife in my hand, before finally saying, "Glad you approve." The next few arrivals were similar, cousins whispering and snickering in the hallway, my aunt winking at me and saying, "Oh, tonight's going to be memorable." My mom arrived last, carrying a pie, looking flushed and excited. "Everything ready?" she asked, scanning the table. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Perfect," she said. "Let's eat. Then we can get to the good part." The good part. I felt my pulse quicken. As everyone sat down, I took my usual seat at the end of the table, carving knife in hand. Usually, this is my favorite moment of the whole year. Everyone quieting down, bowing their heads for grace, waiting for me to slice into the turkey. But this time, I could barely breathe. Mom cleared her throat dramatically. "Before we dig in," she said, "I just want to say how proud I am that we're all here together this year. And I think tonight will bring us even closer as a family." Everyone nodded and smiled, everyone except me. Then she looked straight at me and said, "Edward, why don't you start carving? We don't want to keep everyone waiting." I stood, knife poised over the turkey, but something in her tone made me pause. I could feel every eye in the room on me. And that's when I heard Claire mutter, just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh, this is going to be so good." I swear, when Claire muttered those words, it felt like the room got smaller. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. My hand tightened around the carving knife until my knuckles turned white. I forced myself to smile, the same smile I've worn at every Thanksgiving for years, the one that says, "I can take a joke, I can laugh along." But this time, something in me already knew. This wasn't going to be just a joke. I sliced the first piece of turkey, laying it neatly on the serving platter, and as I did, I caught my mom exchanging a quick look with Carol. It was just a split second, a nod, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching. But I was watching. Dinner started as usual. People passed around dishes, poured wine, complimented the food. For a brief moment, I almost let myself believe that maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe tonight would be like every other year, full of bickering and laughter and too much pie. But then my mom cleared her throat again. "So," she said, setting down her fork and smiling broadly. "Before we get too full and sleepy, we have a little surprise." The table quieted. Carol clasped her hands together. "Yes, we've been waiting all week for this." Claire leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Oh, this is going to be fun." I put my fork down slowly, my appetite gone. My mom looked directly at me. "Edward, you've been doing such a good job hosting Thanksgiving every year, keeping everything so perfect. But we all thought it was time to, well, be honest about a few things." A cold, prickly feeling spread through my chest. "Honest about what?" I asked carefully. "About how you've been acting," she said, her tone deceptively warm, like she was delivering good news. "You're always so serious, so controlling about everything. You have to have everything just so. The napkins folded a certain way, the turkey carved a certain way, everyone sitting exactly where you want them. And we've all been talking." "Talking," I repeated, my voice tightening. "Yes," she said, nodding toward Claire. "In fact, your sister has been keeping a little list." Claire grinned and pulled out her phone. "Oh yeah, we thought it would be fun to share all the times you've gone overboard, to lighten the mood." My stomach dropped. Before I could respond, Claire started reading from her phone. "Let's see," she said, scrolling dramatically. "Last year, Edward made us all wait 40 minutes before eating because the rolls weren't golden brown enough. Oh, and the year before that, he got mad that Uncle Tom brought store-bought cranberry sauce and not homemade. Oh, and remember when he made us all go around the table and say what we were thankful for, twice, because he said the first round didn't sound heartfelt enough?" Laughter rippled around the table. I sat frozen, gripping my chair so hard my fingers ached. "And who could forget," Claire continued, grinning, "the time Edward sent out a 7-page PDF with Thanksgiving guidelines? With diagrams of the table setting?" The table erupted into laughter now, real, loud laughter. My aunt wiped tears from her eyes. My uncle said between chuckles, "You really did that?" My mom beamed, clearly pleased with herself. "See? We're all just having fun, honey." I could feel my ears burning. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Claire wasn't done. "And this year," she said dramatically, "we thought we'd do something special to help you loosen up a little." Before I could ask what she meant, 2 of my cousins jumped up and disappeared into the hallway, returning with a huge cardboard box. They set it on the table in front of me. "Go ahead," Claire said. "Open it." I hesitated, but everyone was staring at me expectantly, so I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside was a cheap paper crown, a plastic scepter, and a sash that said Thanksgiving King. For a second, I just stared at it, not quite understanding. Then Carol clapped her hands. "Put it on," she said. "Come on, Edward," my mom urged, smiling like this was the sweetest thing in the world. "It's just a little joke." I sat there frozen. But before I could say anything, Claire grabbed the crown and shoved it on my head, and one of my cousins draped the sash across my chest. Someone snapped a picture. Someone else started chanting, "Speech! Speech!" I wanted to sink through the floor. They were laughing, all of them, laughing at me. Not with me, at me. "This is what you wanted, right?" Claire said mockingly. "You're the king of Thanksgiving. Everything has to be your way, so we figured we'd make it official." The room roared with laughter again. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. The laughter died down just a little, enough for everyone to notice the look on my face. "Edward," my mom said cautiously. I looked around the table, at my mom's expectant smile, at Claire's smirk, at Carol's raised eyebrows, at the cousins barely containing their laughter, and for a split second, I thought about screaming. About telling them how cruel they were being. About how much work I put into making this day special every year. About how this house, this table, this meal were the only reasons they even had a Thanksgiving to gather around. But instead, I just stood there in silence. And that silence was louder than anything I could have said. My dad cleared his throat. "Sit down, son." We're just joking around. But I didn't sit. I took off the crown slowly, set it gently on the table, and said, very quietly, "You planned this." No one answered. "You all planned this." I repeated, louder this time. Still silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I turned, walked into the kitchen, and just stood there gripping the counter, staring at the turkey knife still lying on the cutting board. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with something else. Something that felt dangerously close to resolve. I don't know how long I stood there in the kitchen, but eventually, I heard the laughter start back up in the dining room. Quieter now, more awkward, but still there. They just moved on. Like nothing had happened. Like my humiliation was just another part of the entertainment. I leaned against the counter and let out a slow breath. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my palms damp. My house felt different now, like I was a guest in it. No, not even a guest, a prop. Eventually, my mom peeked her head into the kitchen. "Edward," she said gently, "come back to the table. Don't ruin dinner." Her words hit me like a slap. Don't ruin dinner. Like I was the one ruining it. Like I hadn't just been turned into the family clown in my own home. "I'm not hungry," I said without looking at her. There was a pause. "Well," she said, her tone sharpening, "at least bring out the pie before it gets cold." And then she was gone. I stood there for another minute, then walked upstairs, away from the noise, away from the smells of food, away from everything. I shut myself in my room and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the stupid sash they had draped across me. I tore it off and threw it into the corner. For the first time in years, I didn't feel proud of this house. Normally, when my family came over, I felt a little swell of pride seeing everyone gathered around the table I had set, under the lights I had hung, eating the meal I had worked so hard to make. But tonight, I felt empty. I could hear faint bits of conversation and laughter floating up from downstairs. At one point, Claire's voice rang out. Guess King Edward needed a royal nap, followed by more laughter. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself not to cry. I'm not the kind of person who cries easily, but something about the situation, the deliberate nature of it, the way they had planned this together, it felt like a deep betrayal. Not a spur-of-the-moment joke, but something they had been looking forward to. Something they had laughed about behind my back for days. And the worst part? They had done it here, in my home. I thought about all the hours I had spent getting everything ready, scrubbing the floors, polishing the silverware, ironing the tablecloth. I thought about the money I had spent on groceries, on wine, on extra chairs so no one would have to sit on a folding one. I thought about how, for years, I had been the one to make sure Thanksgiving happened at all, because no one else was willing to host. And this was how they repaid me. I sat there in silence until I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor downstairs, signaling the end of dinner. There was more laughter, the clatter of dishes being stacked, and then, one by one, I heard the front door open and close as people began leaving. No one came to check on me. No one knocked on the door. When the house finally went quiet, I went downstairs. The dining room looked like a battlefield, plates stacked haphazardly, crumbs everywhere, wine stains on the tablecloth. They hadn't even bothered to clean up properly. Something in me shifted right then. I started cleaning, not because I wanted to, but because I needed something to do with my hands. As I scrubbed the table, my mind started working in a way it hadn't before. I thought about the group chat. I thought about the look my mom and Carol exchanged. I thought about Claire's smirk. Piece by piece, I started putting it together. This wasn't just one night. This was a pattern. I had been bending over backward for years, hosting every major holiday, buying gifts for every niece and nephew, showing up for every birthday party, every graduation, and still, I was the butt of the joke. When I finished cleaning, I sat down at the table with a pen and paper. For the first time in my life, I made a list. Not a shopping list, not a cooking schedule, a list of everything I had done for this family over the past 5 years. Money spent, time taken off work, favors done. I filled nearly 2 pages before I stopped, staring at the numbers. I realized something in that moment. They had come to expect it. The reason they felt so comfortable mocking me, humiliating me in my own home, was because they thought I'd always forgive them. I'd always host next year. I'd always laugh it off. I'd always keep the peace. But as I sat there staring at that list, I knew something had to change. The next morning, my phone was full of messages. Mom, hope you've cooled off. Don't take last night so seriously. Claire, you disappeared. We were just trying to have fun. Carol, You need to learn to take a joke." I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went into the group chat and removed myself. Then I blocked Claire's number. Then Carol's. For a few hours, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because I knew they'd notice. Relief, because for the first time, I wasn't just swallowing my anger. Later that day, my dad called. "You can't just leave the family chat," he said, sounding annoyed. "You're overreacting." "Maybe I am," I said quietly. "But I'm done being the family's punching bag." "Don't be dramatic," he said. "Thanksgiving is supposed to be about family." "It was," I said, "until last night." And I hung up. That evening, I went to the grocery store and bought myself a single-serve frozen dinner. I sat on the couch, ate it in silence, and watched a movie. It was the most peaceful night I'd had in years. But as I sat there, a new thought began forming, slow, quiet, but persistent. If they thought last night was memorable, what would they think when I stopped playing along entirely? And that was the first time I caught myself smiling since Thanksgiving. The morning after my quiet frozen dinner evening, I woke up later than usual and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. There were no frantic group messages buzzing on my phone, no reminders from my mom about next year's menu, no sarcastic jabs from Claire. For the first time in what felt like forever, my house was silent. And it was my silence, not the tense, awkward kind, but the kind that feels like a fresh sheet of snow. I poured myself coffee and sat at the table where my family had humiliated me just days before. The tablecloth was washed and folded, the dishes put away. If it weren't for the faint memory of that stupid paper crown lying in the trash, you'd never know anything had happened. And that's when it hit me. They had expected me to get over it already. By now, I was supposed to be texting apologies for overreacting or inviting them to come by for leftovers. They had probably all laughed about it in their own group chats, patting themselves on the back for teaching me to lighten up. But no one had apologized. No one had even admitted that what they did was cruel. Instead, I was getting messages like, "So, are you hosting Christmas too or not?" I deleted the message without replying. In the days that followed, something in me started to shift. At first it was subtle. I started saying no to things I'd usually agree to, like helping Claire's kids with their science projects or picking up groceries for my mom. I stopped being available on demand. I stopped making myself the default solution to every family inconvenience. And surprisingly, the world didn't end. In fact, my life got better. With the extra time, I started going to the gym again, something I'd neglected for years because I was always running around doing favors. At first, I was clumsy, sore, and out of breath, but after a few weeks, I started feeling stronger. I was sleeping better. My clothes fit differently. Work, too, started improving. I'd been quietly grinding away at my job for years, never making waves, never asking for recognition. But something about setting boundaries with my family gave me a new kind of confidence. I started speaking up more in meetings, pitching ideas instead of just nodding along. To my surprise, people listened. One day, my boss pulled me aside after a presentation. "You've been doing excellent work lately," she said. "How would you feel about taking on a leadership role for the new project in January?" I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was almost giddy. That night, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine and thought about how far I'd come in just a few weeks. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role in the family: the good son, the responsible one, the dependable host. And when they laughed at me, it had felt like an attack on who I was. But now, I was starting to see that I was more than that. I had a life outside of them. I had friends, coworkers, ambitions. And slowly, the anger that had been sitting like a stone in my chest started to turn into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. Christmas came and went, and for the first time ever, I didn't host. In fact, I didn't even attend. I got a dozen texts asking where I was, followed by more accusing me of being dramatic, but I stayed firm. Instead, I spent Christmas with a couple of close friends, playing board games and eating takeout Chinese food. It was simple, quiet, and perfect. New Year's rolled around, and I went to a party with some coworkers. At midnight, as everyone counted down, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was entering a new year without feeling obligated to anyone but myself. That thought was liberating. In January, I accepted the leadership position at work. It meant more hours, but also a significant raise. With the extra money, I finally made a few upgrades I had been putting off: a new sofa, better cookware, and a fresh coat of paint in the dining room. That room had been tainted with memories of my family's laughter, but as I painted it a warm, new color, it felt like reclaiming it. Then came the real turning point. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee near the office, I ran into my cousin Lauren, one of the quieter conspirators from Thanksgiving night. She looked surprised to see me and, after some awkward small talk, finally blurted, "You know, Claire says you're being ridiculous about the whole Thanksgiving thing." I stared at her for a moment and then smiled, not in anger, but in a way that seemed to throw her off. "Tell Claire I said thanks," I said simply, and walked away. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe them an explanation. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing through the grapevine that my absence at family events was making things difficult. Mom had apparently had to host Easter planning meetings herself this year, and Claire was complaining that Edward isn't pulling his weight. Hearing that actually made me laugh. Pulling my weight. For years, I had been carrying the weight of the entire family's holiday expectations, and the second I set it down, they acted like I had betrayed them. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just about me taking a break. This was about me showing them that I was done playing the role they had cast me in. That if they wanted to keep treating me like a prop in their little family comedy routine, they were going to do it without me. I started planning, quietly and methodically. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my coworkers. But I knew that when Thanksgiving rolled around this year, I wasn't just going to skip dinner. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had lost when they decided to humiliate me. I started saving a little extra from every paycheck. I made calls to caterers and rental companies, not for this year, but for the future. I even began working on a few recipes, not the elaborate ones I used to make, but something new, something that would make next year's dinner unforgettable. Because if they thought last year's Thanksgiving was memorable, they hadn't seen anything yet. By the time summer rolled around, I was no longer the same person who had stood frozen in his own dining room while his family laughed at him. My mornings started early at the gym, my work days were full but satisfying, and my evenings were spent doing things for myself, trying new recipes, reading books I'd put off for years, catching up on old hobbies. But even with all those improvements, a single thought kept circling in the back of my mind. Thanksgiving was coming. Every time I passed a grocery store display of turkeys or saw a new autumn recipe online, my stomach would tighten just a little. Not with dread anymore, but with anticipation. In late August, I got a call from my mom, the first one in months. "Edward," she said, her voice unusually polite. "So, we were wondering if you'd be willing to host Thanksgiving again this year." I actually laughed, not out loud, but that quiet kind of laugh you let slip when you can't believe what you're hearing. "I thought you all wanted a different kind of Thanksgiving," I said carefully. "Oh, honey, last year was just a silly thing," she said breezily, as though orchestrating a public humiliation in my own house was no bigger deal than a misplaced napkin. "You know how your sister gets. We were just teasing." I let her words hang there for a moment, then said, "I'll think about it." And for the next 2 months, that's exactly what I did: think, plan, prepare. I knew one thing. If I did decide to host, it wouldn't be for them. It would be for me. Then came the break I didn't know I needed. At work, the project I had been leading all year ended up being a massive success. My boss called me into her office and told me that the company wanted to give me a year-end bonus, a big one. Enough to cover all my expenses for a few months if I wanted. I thanked her, kept my professional face on, but the second I got back to my desk, I started running numbers in my head. With the bonus, plus the money I had been quietly saving all year, I realized I had more than enough to pull off something dramatic. But I didn't just want dramatic. I wanted calculated. I wanted to make them feel what I had felt: blindsided, off balance, forced to sit with the uncomfortable truth about themselves. So, I got strategic. I started reaching out to vendors, discreetly, quietly, using my personal email, caterers, decorators, even a few local event planners. I didn't tell them the full story, just that I wanted something unforgettable, something that would impress a family used to traditional dinners. At the same time, I kept my distance from my family. I wanted them to miss me. I wanted them to feel the gap I left behind when I stopped organizing everything. And apparently, it was working. One afternoon, my aunt accidentally called me while meaning to call someone else, and I overheard her say, "If Edward doesn't host again, I'm not doing it." I'm not cleaning up after everyone. That little comment told me everything. They had taken my efforts for granted for so long that now, without me, their holidays were falling apart. But the real turning point came in early November. I was leaving the office when I ran into Claire of all people, waiting outside the building. She must have found out where I worked from my mom, because she looked way too pleased with herself. "Edward," she said, giving me a smile that was meant to be disarming. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything, just raised an eyebrow. "Look, last year got a little out of hand," she admitted, though her tone made it sound more like she was confessing to spilling a drink than humiliating me. "Mom really wants us all together this year. You know she can't handle hosting. So can we just forget it ever happened?" I studied her for a moment. "Forget it," I said finally. "Claire, you planned it." She shrugged. "We thought it would be funny." "And was it?" I asked. She didn't answer, just looked away. I let the silence stretch, then said, "I'll let you know if I'm hosting." The look on her face was priceless, a mix of hope and confusion. She wasn't expecting me to have that kind of control over the situation. That night, I sat at my desk with a notepad and went through every single detail I wanted to get right. Not just the food, everything. The seating arrangement, the timing, even the music. But more importantly, I planned for what would come after dinner. Because this time, there was going to be a moment, a big one, and I was going to be the one controlling it. As Thanksgiving drew closer, I sent out a single message to the group chat. Yes, I rejoined it, just for this. Thanksgiving dinner. My place. November 28th. That was it. No emojis, no enthusiasm, no extra details. The replies rolled in quickly, excited, relieved, full of smiley faces and exclamation marks. Finally, Claire wrote, "So glad we're back on track," Carol added. But they didn't know what kind of track I had in mind. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I worked like I always did, but this time, I wasn't just cooking, I was orchestrating. I confirmed the caterer, finalized the menu, arranged the delivery schedule, and quietly hired someone to handle cleanup afterward. For the first time ever, I wasn't going to spend Thanksgiving running around the kitchen sweating and exhausted. I was going to sit back, smile, and watch everything unfold. The night before Thanksgiving, I walked through the house and looked at the dining room. It looked perfect, better than perfect. But the real perfection wasn't in the food or the decor. It was in the knowledge that tomorrow, I wouldn't be the one standing in the corner of the kitchen gripping the counter while everyone laughed at me. Tomorrow, they were going to be the ones squirming. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt calm for the first time since last year. This Thanksgiving wasn't just going to be different. It was going to be unforgettable. Thanksgiving morning felt different this year. There was no frantic rush to peel potatoes or baste the turkey. No sticky notes cluttering the fridge, no last-minute panic about whether we had enough chairs. Everything had already been handled. I woke up at 8, showered, and had a quiet breakfast, nothing fancy, just coffee and toast, while watching the morning news. By 10, the caterers arrived, a small team that worked like a well-oiled machine, setting out food, arranging platters, and making sure everything was perfect. For once, I wasn't sweating over a hot oven. I was free to walk around, check on things, and just breathe. By noon, the house looked like something out of a magazine. The table was immaculate, gold chargers, polished glassware, fresh flowers in the center. The turkey, which had been roasted to perfection by professionals, gleamed under the dining room lights. When the doorbell rang at 4, I was ready. The first guests trickled in, my parents, Carol, and Claire. I greeted them politely, but with just enough coolness to remind them I hadn't forgotten. Claire, clearly trying to play the peacemaker, said, "Wow, Edward, you really outdid yourself this year." "Thanks," I said simply, stepping aside so they could see the spread. Their eyes widened. I could see the surprise on their faces. They had expected me to put together another home-cooked dinner, but this was next level. This looked expensive, professional, deliberate. Slowly, the rest of the family arrived, each of them reacting with similar awe. Compliments started flying almost immediately. "This is beautiful. Edward, this must have taken forever. Where did you get those centerpieces?" I just smiled. "Glad you like it." Dinner began, and everything went exactly as I'd planned. The food was perfect, the drinks flowed freely, and conversation started to relax everyone into that familiar holiday rhythm. They were starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different, that I had finally let go and moved on. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. Halfway through the meal, my mom dabbed at her lips with her napkin and said, "Edward, I'm just so glad we're all here together again. This is how Thanksgiving is supposed to be." "Yeah," Claire added, smiling. "Much better than last year's drama, right?" I let that hang in the air for a beat, then set down my glass. "I'm glad you brought that up," I said calmly. The table went quiet. I stood slowly, taking my time. "Last year," I began, my voice steady, "you all decided that humiliating me in my own home would be entertaining." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You planned it ahead of time. You talked about it behind my back. You turned something that I loved, this day, this meal, into a stage where I was the punchline." "Edward," my mom began, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, still calm. "You had your turn last year. Now it's mine." I reached under the table and pulled out a folder I had placed there earlier. Inside were copies of the list I had made months ago, every holiday I had hosted, every dollar I had spent, every time I had rearranged my life to accommodate them. I passed the copies around the table. "This," I said, "is what I have done for this family since I started hosting. Every single holiday, every single expense. I did it because I wanted to, because I thought it mattered. And this," I gestured to the room, to the food, to the perfect table, "is the last time I will ever do it for you." There was a stunned silence. "I wanted you to see," I continued, "what it looks like when someone puts in effort not out of obligation, but out of choice. When someone cares enough to do it right. And I wanted you to enjoy it, because after tonight, you are on your own." My dad frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I replied evenly, "that this is the last holiday I will ever host. I will not be the family's unpaid event planner anymore. I will not spend weeks cleaning, cooking, and coordinating so I can be laughed at. If you want Thanksgiving next year, you can host it yourselves." Claire blinked, clearly stunned. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, cutting her off. "And I am." I let that sink in for a moment, then delivered the final part of my plan. "Oh, and by the way," I added casually, "the caterers are packing up the leftovers and taking them with them when they leave. So if anyone wants seconds, I'd get them now." There was a small gasp from someone at the table. "Yes," I said. "That means there will be no containers full of turkey for you to take home this year. No free meals for the rest of the weekend. Tonight, you eat what's here, and when it's gone, it's gone." You could have heard a pin drop. And then, for good measure, I smiled. Not the forced, placating smile I had worn last year, but a genuine one, the kind that said I was completely in control. "Now," I said, sitting back down, "who wants pie?" The rest of the meal was quiet, eerily quiet. No one made jokes. No one laughed. For the first time in years, I was the one who held the room in silence. And it felt incredible. As dinner wrapped up, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. Then, as the caterers began clearing plates, I added, "You'll find the front door unlocked. Happy Thanksgiving." One by one, they got up, gathering their coats in silence, their faces pale and stunned. And as the last guest stepped out into the cold November night, I stood in the doorway, watching them go, my house warm and glowing behind me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. That night, after the last taillight disappeared down my street, I closed the door, locked it, and let out a long, slow breath. The house was quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt earned. The caterers finished packing up the last of the trays and handed me the receipt. I thanked them and slipped them an extra tip, feeling almost giddy as I watched them load the food into their van and drive away. No leftovers. No mess for me to clean. No family lingering in the living room pretending to help while making little jabs. Just silence. Real, peaceful silence. I sat down at the head of the table, still set with the beautiful plates and half-burnt candles, and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time since I could remember, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I didn't feel like the night had taken something out of me. This time, I felt like I had taken something back. The fallout began the next morning. At 7:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with the first message. "Mom, Edward, we need to talk about last night." Then Claire, "Seriously? Taking the leftovers? That was petty. Carol, we all feel like you overreacted. You made everyone uncomfortable." I stared at the screen, sipping my coffee. Then, without replying, I set the phone down and went for a run. By the time I got back, there were 12 missed calls. 2 from my dad, 5 from Claire, even 1 from my aunt, who never calls. I made breakfast, sat by the window, and ate slowly, ignoring the constant buzzing. Later that afternoon, my dad finally left a voicemail. "Son, what you did last night was out of line. You embarrassed your mother in front of the entire family. You need to apologize and fix this before Christmas." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Christmas. That was the part that made me laugh out loud. They still thought there would be a Christmas. Over the next few days, the messages escalated. Claire accused me of ruining Thanksgiving for everyone. My mom sent a long, tearful text about how family is all we have and how I was tearing us apart. Carol sent me a passive-aggressive photo of her kids eating frozen pizza with the caption, "Glad you're teaching them valuable lessons about generosity." But here's the thing, none of it worked. For the first time ever, their guilt trips didn't land. I didn't feel like the bad guy, because I wasn't. I knew what they were really upset about. Not that I had been petty, not that I had overreacted, but that I had taken away their favorite thing, the free labor, the guaranteed meal, the ability to laugh at me and still expect me to serve dessert. And without me, they had nothing to fall back on. Word started trickling in through relatives who were less involved that Christmas dinner had been a disaster. Claire had tried to host, but her kitchen wasn't big enough. The turkey had come out dry, and half the cousins ended up eating takeout by the end of the night. I didn't go. Instead, I spent Christmas in the mountains with a couple of friends, sitting by a fire, drinking hot cocoa, and watching the snow fall. When New Year's rolled around, I got a single text from my mom. "We miss you. Can we start over?" I sat with that message for a while. I could feel a part of me softening, remembering the years before all the tension, before the humiliation, before everything boiled over. But then I remembered standing in my kitchen last Thanksgiving, hands shaking, staring at the counter while everyone laughed in the other room. I remembered the sash, the crown, the chanting, and I knew my answer. I typed back, "You can start over. Without me." Then I blocked the group chat entirely and turned off my phone. That night, I sat on my couch, the house quiet except for the sound of the fireplace crackling, and I smiled. A small, calm smile. For years, I had given my family everything they asked for. And for once, I had given myself something back. I raised my glass in the empty room and said softly, "Happy New Year, Edward." And it was. I'm 18, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the quiet one. The kid who didn't ask for much, who kept to himself, who got good grades, didn't make waves, and tried to make my parents proud in the hopes they might one day see me. Not just as their son, but as someone who mattered. My name's Daniel, and this story starts 2 months before high school graduation, but it really goes back much further. Back to a childhood filled with whispered comparisons, tight-lipped dinners, and a sister who, for whatever reason, always sparkled more brightly in their eyes than I ever could. My sister Lily is a year younger than me. She's pretty, popular, and loud in the kind of way that makes adults smile and say things like, "What a personality." Growing up, it didn't matter what I did. If she got a B and I got an A, they'd ask me why I didn't help her study. If I won an award, they'd say, "Well, Lily's more of a people person." When I made the honor roll for the 4th year in a row, Mom literally said, "It's not like you're curing cancer, Daniel." I used to brush it off, tell myself it didn't matter. That one day, they'd see what I was worth. That if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally say, "We're proud of you." That never came. Senior year, I started applying to colleges. I did it alone. No one offered to help, and I didn't ask. While Lily was getting a new iPad to help with studying and going on weekend trips with Mom to tour high school she'd already decided not to attend, I was juggling part-time work at the campus library, filling out applications at night, and trying not to collapse under the pressure. I didn't even tell anyone I applied to MIT. Not because I didn't think I could get in, but because I knew how it would go. They'd scoff. Say something like, "That's cute, Daniel, but be realistic." So I kept it to myself. All of it. A few weeks before the acceptance letters came in, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. I remember it so clearly because it was one of the only times in my life they actually called me to talk. Not yelled, not lectured, talked. Dad had this look on his face, tight-lipped, eyes shifting, like he was already expecting me to make a scene. Mom didn't even sit. She leaned on the counter like she was just dropping in for a quick word. Lily was in the living room, pretending not to listen but obviously waiting for the outcome. "We've been thinking," Dad said, slowly, as if he were testing the words, "about your college fund." I blinked. "Okay," Mom cut in. "Lily's been going through a rough time, and with her grades, well, she's improving. She just needs some encouragement." My stomach dropped. I already knew where this was going. "She wants to go to a private school in California," Dad said. "It's not cheap, but it's a great opportunity. And, well, she has a future there. She's going to major in communications. That school's got amazing networking." I was silent, waiting, holding my breath. "So we're thinking," Mom said, still not looking at me, "maybe you could give her your college fund." There it was. No apology, no discussion, just a decision dressed up as a suggestion. My entire life, they'd been setting me up to be the quiet one, the easy one, the one who could take the hit so Lily wouldn't have to. I didn't speak for a long time. I just looked at them, my parents, these people who were supposed to believe in me, who had never once asked what I wanted or what I dreamed of. Dad fidgeted. Mom finally glanced over, clearly annoyed that I hadn't just nodded and said, "Sure. You're smart, Daniel," she said, like that was the justification. "You'll figure it out. Lily just needs a boost." That phrase, "you'll figure it out." They'd said that to me when my bike got stolen and they wouldn't replace it. When I needed help with calculus and they didn't want to pay for tutoring. When Lily had a tantrum over not getting new shoes and they gave her the money they'd promised me for a debate trip. I could feel my hands shaking under the table, but I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just slowly reached into my backpack, pulled out a plain envelope, and slid it across the table. "What's this?" Dad asked. "Read it," I said quietly. Mom opened it. Her eyes moved across the page, slowly at first, then faster. She read it again. Dad leaned in. The silence in that room was deafening. A full-ride scholarship. MIT. One of the most competitive programs in the country. "I've known for a month," I said. "I was going to tell you. But then I figured, you'd be busy with Lily." No one spoke. Lily was still on the couch, frozen, her phone in her lap. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to say something, but I stood up before he could. "I packed last night," I said, grabbing my bag. "My flight's tomorrow. Orientation starts early for scholars." Mom stepped forward like she wanted to stop me, maybe say something motherly for once in her life. But she didn't. She just stood there, helpless and stunned. I walked out the front door, past the car they said they couldn't afford to help me buy, past the mailbox where I used to check every day for birthday cards that never came, past the flower beds Lily used to trample when she got mad and blamed me for. And I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I just kept waking. My bag wasn't heavy, but my chest was. Not from regret. Not from sadness, either. It was something else. Relief. Maybe. A strange, painful kind of peace. The kind you feel when a wound finally closes, even if the scar will stay forever. I got into the rideshare I'd already booked, looked back once, not at the house, but at the driveway where I used to shoot hoops with a flat basketball because we're not wasting money on another one. I watched the door. No one came out. Not Lily. Not Mom. Not Dad. The driver didn't say much, just nodded when I said the airport. I remember resting my forehead against the window, letting the sunlight warm my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I breathed in a way that didn't feel like I had to earn it. I landed in Boston late the next day. It was gray and cold, but to me, it felt like a new world. I found my dorm, met my roommate, a robotics prodigy from Japan, and unpacked in silence. Every photo of my family I had brought with me, I left in the bottom drawer. I didn't hang them up. I told myself I'd decide what to do with them later. They didn't deserve to be part of this new chapter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Over the next few weeks, life moved fast. MIT was like drinking from a fire hose. Every class, every student, every moment was intense and demanding, but I thrived. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the background character. I wasn't Lily's brother. I was just Daniel. And Daniel was finally enough. But then came the messages. It started as a single text from my mom. "We're proud of you. Can we talk soon?" I didn't respond. Then a call from Dad. I watched the screen light up with his name. Let it ring. Voicemail. "Just wanted to hear how things are going. Lily's really sorry about everything." I hadn't heard her voice once. Not before I left. Not since. Then Lily herself finally texted me, weeks later. I'll never forget it. "Hey, sorry if things got weird. I didn't ask them to do that. I was just trying to follow my dream too. She attached a selfie of her on a California beach. Sunglasses, smile, and a caption that said, Cali Life #future media star. No apology. Just a subtle flex. As if my college fund was something she earned by simply existing. Still, I said nothing. It wasn't until mid-October that the story truly came full circle. I just finished a late seminar when I got an email from the dean's office. They were hosting a dinner for new full-ride students, donors, and select families. It was meant to be this big celebration of our potential and the people who helped us get there. Every student was allowed to invite 2 guests. 2 seats. I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't have anyone to invite. Not really. But I thought of someone, Mr. Gellner, my old high school physics teacher. He was the only one who believed I could do something big. The one who wrote my letter of recommendation when no one else would. I emailed him. He said yes immediately. At the dinner, surrounded by polished suits and expensive dresses, I stood a little taller. The room was buzzing with conversations, laughter, the clink of glasses. A few parents gave speeches. One mom broke down crying while talking about how hard her son worked to get in. I clapped politely. It was touching. Honest. I felt a twinge of something, but not jealousy. Just distance. Like I was watching a movie I wasn't cast in. When I stood to speak, each scholar had a moment to say something. I thanked Mr. Gellner. Thanked the university. Thanked the people who'd shown up in my life, however briefly, and made me feel seen. Then I paused. My eyes scanned the crowd. I want to dedicate this moment to the people who taught me silence, I said. To the ones who thought I'd just figure it out. You were right. I did. I smiled. A few people clapped, not quite sure what I meant. But Mr. Gellner gave me a knowing nod. The next day, my name was on the university's homepage. MIT Scholars Speech Highlights Quiet Strength and Resilience. That same evening, I got another text from my dad. We saw the article. Can we talk? Your mom's been crying. Another message from Lily. Okay, seriously? That dinner thing? That was about us, wasn't it? Don't act like you're better than the rest of us now. Better? No. Just finally free. I didn't answer. I was done explaining myself to people who never bothered to ask in the first place. But here's where things took a turn. A few days later, something unexpected arrived in my inbox. A scanned copy of a withdrawal form from the California school Lily had enrolled in. And right below that, a GoFundMe link titled, Help Lily Get Back on Her Feet, College Dreams Derailed by Unfair System. My stomach dropped when I saw the donor list. Guess who had already contributed? My parents. $5,000. $5,000. That's when something inside me shifted again. Not hurt, not disappointment, but something colder. Like I'd been holding back too much, too long. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. I started writing something public. Not a rant, not a cry for sympathy, just the truth. And it was time the world finally heard it. I spent 2 full nights writing it. Between classes and lab work and late-night ramen in the dorm kitchen, I kept coming back to that blank page. And with every word I typed, it felt like I was taking back a piece of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. I titled the post, When They Said She Has a Future and Left Me Behind, and uploaded it to Medium under my real name. Not some anonymous vent, not some private blog. I wanted them to see it. The post told everything. How I'd worked for years while my sister coasted. How I'd built my applications in silence while they bought her ring lights and vacation trips. How they told me to give up my future without hesitation. How I left without saying goodbye, not out of spite, but because there was never really a goodbye to give. Because emotionally, they'd left me behind years ago. I attached a copy of my MIT acceptance letter. Redacted my ID info. Just left enough to be clear, I wasn't making this up. I even linked Lily's GoFundMe at the end. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't tell people not to donate. I just asked one question. If she has a future, why did they think I didn't? Within hours, it started spreading. Comments came in fast. Students, adults, even some parents sharing their own stories. One guy said it was like reading about his life in real time. Another said, "You've inspired me to apply to college again. I dropped out because I believed them when they said I wouldn't make it." A few people tracked down Lily's GoFundMe and started asking questions in the comments. Why wasn't her family fundraising for both kids? Where was their support when I was applying? Some even shared screenshots of my article directly on the page. By the end of the week, the fundraiser was locked. Donations disabled. The page scrubbed of any mention of me. And then came the voicemail. Daniel, Mom's voice cracked. What you wrote, it's not fair. You're painting us like monsters. We were doing what we thought was best. Lily needed the help. That money, it was never meant to hurt you. Please, can we talk? Then Dad, it's gone too far, son. Take it down. This isn't just about you anymore. Your sister's been getting threats. Your mother's not sleeping. Please. And finally, Lily, I can't believe you would humiliate me like that. Do you think I wanted to take your fund? Do you think this has been easy for me? I'm your sister, Daniel. Or at least I was. That one stung a little. Not because I wanted her sympathy, but because for a second, it showed what this was all about to her. Image. Not family. Not remorse. Reputation. But I didn't respond. Not to any of them. Instead, I went to my professor, Dr. Harland, an older man who'd been at MIT longer than I'd been alive. He was mentoring me through a research assistant position, and I trusted him. I asked him if I'd gone too far. If maybe I should take it down. He just looked at me over his glasses and said, Daniel, it takes a lot of courage to speak the truth when silence has always been expected of you. You didn't go too far. They just never thought you'd go anywhere. That same week, I got invited to speak at a panel on first-generation students and family dynamics. Someone from the article had passed my name along. They wanted me to share my story. Not just the scholarship, not just the drama, but everything. So I did. I stood in front of over 200 people, students, professors, alumni, and told them exactly what it felt like to grow up in a house that only had one golden child, and it wasn't you. What it meant to have to prove your worth over and over again, until you weren't even doing it for love anymore, just survival. After the panel, a woman came up to me in tears. She said, I wish my son had someone like you to hear from when he was your age. Maybe he wouldn't have given up. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time ever, I didn't feel invisible. But then something happened I didn't expect. An email from my grandmother. She's in her 80s. Lives in Florida. We don't talk much, but she used to send me birthday cards with $20 inside and always called me her little genius. The email was short. Just 2 sentences. I read what you wrote. I had no idea. You deserve better, sweetheart. She ended it with, P.S. Check your bank account. I did. $10,000. No explanation. No lecture. Just action. I don't know what it meant to her, or if she'd seen the GoFundMe. But it was the first time someone in my family gave me something without making me beg for it. And that money? I didn't use it on tuition. I started a program with a few classmates. A mentorship fund for kids like me. Firstgens, quiet ones, overlooked and underestimated. We called it the Invisible Scholars Initiative. We launched our website, started hosting info sessions in underfunded high schools, offering mock interviews, essay feedback, and a small scholarship for one student each semester, funded from that original 10 grand. MIT caught wind of it and backed us. And suddenly, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was a founder, a leader, a name worth remembering. Back home, I heard through a mutual friend that Lily ended up taking a gap year. Said she needed time to heal from online hate. My parents? No idea. They've stopped trying to contact me for now. Maybe they'll try again. Maybe not. But here's the thing. I used to wait for their approval like it was oxygen. Now, I'm finally learning how to breathe without it. It was the middle of winter when the final act began. Snow blanketing the sidewalks of Cambridge, crisp air stinging my face as I walked to the lab. MIT was quiet that morning, but my phone was not. It buzzed nonstop with texts, emails, and voicemail notifications. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the subject line that changed everything. You've been tagged in a family post. I opened the link, and there it was. A Facebook post from my mother, public, long, and dramatic. She'd written a 4-paragraph open letter to the world. It was carefully worded, drenched in self-pity, and just vague enough to avoid specifics. But I knew exactly who it was about. She wrote about how some children forget who raised them, how gratefulness has been lost in this generation, and how supporting one child shouldn't be twisted into abuse of another. She ended it with a photo of Lily, fake tears in her eyes, sitting on the floor with college brochures scattered around her, captioned, still holding on to her dreams, even with everything that's happened. Heartbreak emoji. Hashtag family is forever. The comments were predictable. You're so strong. Your kids are lucky to have you. Shame on whoever hurt your family like this. But not all of them. People had read my article, shared it, remembered it. Some had screenshots. Others linked it directly in the comments. Isn't this the woman who told her son to give up his college fund for the daughter? Wait, isn't the daughter the one who made that GoFundMe right after he got a scholarship? I read Daniel's story. She's gaslighting the whole internet. The tide turned in real time. I didn't even need to comment. The community spoke for me. Within 2 days, the post was deleted. But the fallout? That took a little longer. They tried calling again, texting, even emailing my student account this time. Dad wrote, "We didn't know you'd make it." That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. Mom said, "You embarrassed us, but I suppose we deserved it." Lily sent one last message. "Congrats on your little program. I hope it keeps you warm at night." It didn't make me angry. It just made me tired. I blocked them all. Again, but this time, it felt different. Final. 2 months later, I got another email, this time from MIT's Alumni Relations Office. They'd seen the buzz, the article, the mentorship initiative. They wanted to nominate me for a Student Impact Award at graduation. Said my work had already helped 4 high school students get into top-tier colleges with scholarships. One of them was from my hometown, the same school Lily and I went to. That night, I sat on my dorm bed, looking out over the snow-covered campus, and thought about who I used to be. The boy who sat quietly at the kitchen table while they planned Lily's future with my money. The boy who waited for someone to notice. He was gone. In his place stood someone new. Not just accepted, not just surviving, but seen, heard, respected. At graduation, I wore the same cap and gown as everyone else, but my name got called last. They saved my award for the end. As I stood on stage, the dean handed me a plaque. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. I glanced out at the crowd, full of people who believed in me, who didn't even know me just a few years ago, and still chose to clap anyway. And I realized something. I didn't need to be part of the family I was born into. I built my own, one that never asked me to give up my future just so someone else could have one. I walked off that stage not just with a degree, but with closure. And I never looked back. My name's Joey, I'm 29, and if you asked anyone in my family, they'd tell you I'm the one who never figured life out. The funny thing is, that used to be true. I was working odd jobs, barely scraping by, and my family loved reminding me of it. My mom always said I needed to get serious. My older brother thought I was lazy, and my dad, before he passed, used to say I'd learn the hard way. Well, life has a weird sense of humor, because the hard way ended up leading me straight to something I never saw coming. A $100 million inheritance from an uncle I barely knew existed. The story really begins about 2 months before I got that phone call. I was living in a small 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The kind of place where you could smell detergent through the floorboards and hear the hum of dryers at 2 a.m. Rent was $700, and even that felt like too much most months. My car was a decade old and made a noise like a dying seal every time I turned left. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't happy either. I just existed, and my family treated me like background noise in their lives. My mom, Linda, was the self-appointed matriarch, loud, controlling, and always right. My brother, Nate, was the golden child. Married young, bought a house, had kids, made 6 figures in sales. He was the kind of guy who used networking as a verb in casual conversation. My sister, Amber, was somewhere in between, a nurse with 2 degrees and the ability to make me feel 12 years old just by raising an eyebrow. We weren't close. After Dad's funeral 3 years ago, the calls stopped. The group text slowed. Eventually, it was like I didn't exist unless they needed something fixed or moved. Then came the call. It was from a law office in New York. The man on the other end said, "Mr. Carter, I'm calling regarding the estate of your late uncle, Jameson Carter." I remember blinking, trying to place the name. Uncle Jameson? The only time I'd heard of him was when Dad mentioned his eccentric brother who moved away decades ago after a family feud. I thought he was long dead, or maybe just didn't want anything to do with us. The lawyer continued, explaining that Uncle Jameson had passed away without a spouse or children, and apparently, I was the only living relative he hadn't cut from his will. At first, I thought it was a scam, but the next day, I got an official letter, embossed and everything, inviting me to New York to discuss the estate. I borrowed money from a friend for gas and drove there expecting maybe a few $1,000s. When the lawyer slid the folder across the table, I laughed, literally laughed out loud, because I thought the number was a typo. $103 million, give or take, in assets and liquid funds. He left all this to me? I asked. The lawyer nodded. He was very particular. He wanted his estate to go to the one family member who didn't ask him for anything. I sat there for a long time, completely stunned. My life had just changed in a way I couldn't even process. But as the shock faded, a strange calm settled in. I realized something. For the first time ever, I held all the cards. And I wanted to see who in my family cared about me. Not the version of me they'd built in their heads, not the failure they liked to look down on, but me, the person. So I made a plan. I didn't tell a soul about the inheritance. I didn't buy anything flashy. I didn't move or quit my part-time job at the hardware store. I kept living exactly as before. The only difference was that I had a secret, one I intended to use carefully. A few weeks later, I started making calls. I began with Mom. She answered on the third ring, already irritated. "Joey, I'm in the middle of something," she said, as if I'd interrupted a state dinner. "Hey, Mom," I said, keeping my voice small. "Listen, I could use a little help. Rent's coming up, and I'm short. Maybe a couple hundred, just until next week." There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh. "Joey, you can't keep living like this. You're almost 30. I told you to apply at Nate's company. Why can't you just listen for once?" "Mom, I'm too busy for this right now, Joey," she cut me off. "Figure it out." Click. That was it. My own mother hung up on me when I asked for help. It stung more than I expected. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling this cold mix of anger and sadness building inside me. But I wasn't done. Next was Nate. He answered with his usual confident voice. "Yo, little bro. What's up?" I explained my situation again, pretending to sound embarrassed. "Man," he laughed, "you're still doing this? You know what, Joey? Maybe you should try getting a real job instead of mooching off people. Everyone's hiring these days." I tried to joke it off, but he wasn't playing. "Come on, Nate, just a loan." "Nah, man," he said, still laughing. "I've got my own bills. You'll figure it out. You always do, right?" And just like that, he hung up too. I didn't even bother calling Amber. I already knew what she'd say. Something about personal responsibility or boundaries. So I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a name I barely remembered. Clara, my cousin. We'd met maybe 3 times growing up, once at a family reunion, once at Grandma's funeral, and once at some awkward barbecue years ago. She lived a few towns over, quiet, kind of shy. We'd never really talked. But something told me to call her anyway. When she answered, her voice was soft but warm. "Joey, wow, it's been ages. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then repeated my story. "I hate to ask, but I'm in a tight spot. Rent's due, and say no more," she interrupted. "Are you home right now?" I blinked. Yeah? Okay. I'll be there in a few hours." 3 hours later, she showed up in her beat-up hatchback with a bag of groceries, a thermos of soup, and a folded $20 bill. "I know it's not much," she said, smiling awkwardly. "But it's something." I tried to protest, but she waved me off. "Don't worry about it. Family helps family." That line stuck with me. Family helps family. Because up until that moment, I didn't believe it. Not with my family, anyway. That night, after she left, I sat on my couch surrounded by bags of food and thought about everything. About Mom's cold dismissal, Nate's laughter, and Clara's quiet kindness. I felt something shift inside me, a mix of gratitude and resolve. I realized I'd been given an opportunity, not just to see who cared, but to truly change how things played out. My family had spent years judging me for being the failure. But now I had the means to test every relationship, every bond, every fake smile. So I decided to take it further. I'd pretend to spiral, slowly, believably. I'd make them see what it felt like to ignore someone who needed them, to show them the difference between greed and goodness. But what I didn't realize then was how fast that small experiment would spiral out of control. Because once money enters the equation, especially hidden money, people change. And when the truth finally started to leak out, it didn't just destroy old grudges. It exposed things about my family I never wanted to know. And it all started with one dinner. A dinner I wish I could say went well. But it was the night everything began to unravel. I didn't plan on inviting them over. Honestly, I would have been happy never seeing most of them again. But Mom called me a few days later, out of nowhere, and said, "Joey, we should have dinner. It's been too long. Amber's off this weekend and Nate's bringing the kids." Her voice was sugary in that way it only got when she wanted something. For a moment, I almost told her about the inheritance just to see how fast that sweetness would turn into calculation. But I bit my tongue and agreed. The dinner was set for Saturday. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, even though I knew Mom would still find something to criticize. The place smelled faintly like detergent and coffee. I'd even bought a rotisserie chicken and some sides from the store, cheap but decent. By 6 o'clock, they arrived in a wave of perfume, laughter, and judgment. Mom stepped in first, wrinkling her nose like the air offended her. "Oh, Joey," she said, scanning the tiny kitchen-living room combo. "Still here? You know, you'd save money if you moved in with Nate for a while." Nate chuckled, tossing his jacket over the chair like he owned the place. "Yeah, bro, we've got a guest room. Though, fair warning, the kids wake up early. Might be too much for you." Amber trailed behind them, smiling politely but already eyeing the floor like she was checking for stains. "It's cozy," she offered, which was her go-to insult disguised as kindness. I tried to shrug it off. "Dinner's ready." I didn't have time to cook much, but Mom interrupted. "You didn't make anything homemade?" No, just store-bought," I said, feeling small again. She sighed dramatically, like I'd failed an exam. "You know, Joey, sometimes I wonder what you do all day." They ate, though Mom complained that the chicken was dry and Nate asked if I even knew how to season food. I just smiled through it, sipping water and letting them talk. Amber showed pictures of her vacation in Italy. Nate bragged about his promotion. Mom told a long story about a charity gala she'd attended, emphasizing how networking with the right people was important in life. I nodded, pretending to care, while inside, I felt this low, steady burn. When the conversation lulled, I said casually, "So, Clara stopped by last week." Mom's fork froze midair. "Clara?" "Yeah. She brought groceries when I was short on rent. It was really nice of her." Amber frowned. "Clara? Our cousin Clara? The one who still drives that rust bucket?" "Yeah," I said, smiling a little. She didn't even hesitate. Mom set her fork down slowly. "Joey, I hope you didn't make her feel obligated. She's not exactly in a position to help anyone." "She offered," I said. Nate chuckled. "Man, she's always been too soft. That girl would give her last dollar to a stranger." Mom nodded, satisfied. "Exactly. You shouldn't take advantage of that, Joey. You need to learn some pride." Something about that word, pride, set my teeth on edge. My mom had spent her entire life preaching pride while using shame as her favorite tool. I wanted to tell her that Clara had more compassion in one act than my entire family combined, but I stayed quiet. Then Nate leaned back in his chair, stretching like he'd just finished a shift. "So, Joey, what's the plan? You sticking with the hardware store forever? Or are you finally going to get serious?" I smiled faintly. "Working on something." Amber tilted her head. "Working on what exactly?" I shrugged. "Just trying to figure things out." Mom sighed again, disappointed. "You've been figuring things out for 10 years. Maybe it's time to admit you're not meant for whatever it is you think you're chasing." That stung, and she knew it. She always knew where to aim. After dinner, as they were leaving, Mom hugged me stiffly and said, "We love you, Joey. We just want what's best for you." Which, in Mom speak, meant we love you as long as you stay beneath us. When they left, I stood in the quiet, empty apartment, the smell of reheated chicken lingering in the air. I thought about how none of them had even asked how I was doing, what I'd been up to, if I was happy. It was all subtle jabs and expectations, wrapped in family love. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words. I realized that money wasn't the real test. Character was. And my family was failing miserably. I started to think about ways to expose just how transactional their love really was. Over the next week, I started acting a little different. I dropped small comments. "I might have to sell my car," or "I think my job's cutting my hours." Every time, I got the same response: silence. No offer to help. No sympathy, just awkward nods or half-hearted, "That sucks, man." But then I mentioned it to Clara one afternoon over the phone. "If you need anything, Joey," she said instantly, "I can send you some money. Don't worry about paying it back." I had to look away because I actually felt my eyes sting a bit. She had so little, and yet she was the only one who gave. A week later, Mom invited me to a family dinner at her house. I knew what that meant. She'd probably found something new to brag about. But I went anyway, because part of me wanted to see how far this charade could go. Her house was the same as always, spotless, overdecorated, filled with fake smiles. Nate was already there, glass of wine in hand, talking about real estate investments. Amber was scrolling through her phone, pretending not to listen. When I walked in, Mom hugged me tightly. "Joey, you look thin. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said, stepping back. We sat down, and sure enough, within minutes, the conversation turned toward me. "Joey," Mom started, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you let Nate help you. He's got contacts. He could get you in at his company." Nate smirked. "Yeah, man. I could pull some strings. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. And hey, maybe you'll learn a thing or two about responsibility." I felt the corners of my mouth twitch. "I appreciate it," I said slowly, "but I'm good for now." Mom frowned. "Good? Joey, you're nearly 30. You can't live paycheck to paycheck forever." Amber chimed in. "Maybe Mom's right. You need to think long-term. Don't you want a house? A future?" I looked around at their faces, 3 people who dismissed me, laughed at me, and now pretended to care. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I do." But then Mom's expression changed. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You know, Joey, sometimes I worry about you. You're so secretive. You never tell us what's going on. It's hard to help someone who doesn't want to be helped." I laughed softly. "Help? Mom, you hung up on me 2 weeks ago when I asked for $200. Her face went red. "Don't be dramatic. I was busy." Amber looked between us. "You asked Mom for money?" Nate laughed. "Oh, come on, Joey. You really gotta stop with the sob stories." The table went silent for a moment. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Right," I said finally. "Sob stories. My bad." Mom sighed like she was the victim. "We're just trying to push you, Joey. You're capable of so much more. But you keep making excuses." The rest of dinner was tense. I barely spoke. When I left, I caught Nate whispering something about me to Amber, and they both laughed. Mom pretended not to notice. Driving home, I couldn't shake the image of Clara's face in contrast to theirs, her kindness versus their arrogance. And that's when an idea began to form. Not just to test them anymore, but to teach them. A few days later, I called Mom and told her I'd been let go from the hardware store. "Oh, Joey," she said, sounding genuinely inconvenienced. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," I said softly. "Just trying to get by." "Well, don't expect me to fund another one of your phases," she said quickly. "You've got to be responsible." Then she added, almost like an afterthought, "But maybe Nate can help you find something temporary." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring at the wall. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. The next day, Clara called again. "Hey," she said, "I was thinking, I have a friend who runs a small cafe. They're hiring part-time. It's not much, but maybe it could help." I smiled into the phone. "You're amazing, Clara." "Really?" She laughed lightly. "No, just human." That single line made me realize what my plan would look like. I'd let my family see what they chose, kindness or convenience. I'd make them face the version of me they thought they were better than, until the moment came when the truth would shatter their perfect little hierarchy. But before that day arrived, something unexpected happened. Mom invited me again, this time to celebrate Nate's birthday. "Bring a small gift if you can," she added, like she was doing me a favor. I didn't realize it then, but that dinner would be the one where everything started to unravel for real. Because someone I didn't expect, was about to expose a small piece of my secret. And once that happened, the masks everyone wore began to slip, one by one. Nate's birthday dinner was at Mom's house, as usual. She loved hosting, mostly because it gave her a chance to show off her new furniture or how spotless her kitchen was. When I arrived, the driveway was already packed. Nate's SUV, Amber's silver sedan, and a couple of cars I didn't recognize. I parked down the street and walked up with a cheap bottle of wine tucked under my arm. Not that anyone there actually drank it. Mom only kept expensive bottles for real guests. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. That quiet, invisible shift in the air. The way conversations paused for just a second when I entered the room. The way Mom's smile was just a little too wide, like she was bracing for impact. Nate stood near the dining table surrounded by coworkers, guys in suits, laughing too loudly, holding beers. Amber was helping set up the cake. When she saw me, her smile faltered before she forced it back into place. "Hey, Joey," she said. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, forcing my own smile. Mom swooped in, adjusting my collar like I was a child. "Oh, you look nice," she said. Then, in a lower voice, "Next time, maybe try something a little less casual." I was wearing jeans and a button-up. Everyone else looked like they were at a business networking event. "Sure, Mom," I said, stepping away. Dinner was loud. Nate was the center of attention, cracking jokes, telling stories about work. His friends laughed at everything he said. I sat at the far end of the table next to Amber, who was scrolling through her phone under the tablecloth. Every few minutes, someone would ask Nate about his investments or his new car. No one asked me a single question. I tried to stay quiet, to just observe. But midway through dinner, Mom turned to me and said, "So, Joey, what have you been up to lately? Still between jobs?" Her tone was polite enough to fool a stranger, but I could hear the venom underneath. The guest looked at me with mild curiosity. Forks paused midair. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "Still figuring things out." One of Nate's co-workers smirked. "Must be nice, man. Wish I could take a year off." Everyone laughed, including Nate. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I guess so." Mom sighed. "You know, Joey, you really should take advantage of having family who can help. I told you Nate could get you something entry-level. It's not glamorous, but it's stable." I nodded again, pretending to be unfazed. "I'll think about it." Amber chimed in. "It'd be good for you, Joey. Routine might help." The table chuckled like that was a clever joke. I sat there, surrounded by people who were supposed to care about me, feeling smaller by the minute. I couldn't even enjoy the food. It tasted like resentment. After dinner, people started moving to the living room for cake and drinks. That's when I saw Clara walk in. I froze. She looked out of place immediately, simple dress, shy smile, holding a wrapped box in both hands. "Hey," she said softly when she spotted me. "Clara? You came." "Of course," she said. "Your mom invited me. Said it'd be good to catch up with everyone." That was news to me. Mom hadn't mentioned inviting her. When Mom saw Clara, her face brightened, fake bright. "Clara, so glad you made it. How lovely of you to bring a gift." Clara smiled. "Wouldn't miss Nate's birthday." But I could tell she was nervous. My family had a way of making people feel like intruders in their own skin. During cake, Mom made a toast. She went around the room, thanking everyone for coming. When she reached me, she said, "And of course, Joey's here too. It's good to see him making time for family again." Everyone clapped politely, and I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. Afterward, as people milled around chatting, I saw Mom pull Clara aside in the corner of the room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. "Clara, dear," Mom said, her tone sweet but sharp. "You're such a kind girl, always helping everyone. I just hope Joey hasn't been taking advantage of your generosity." Clara blinked. "Excuse me." "Oh, don't misunderstand me," Mom said quickly. "It's just, he told us you brought him groceries and money. You shouldn't let him guilt you like that. He's always been a bit dramatic when he's struggling." Clara's face turned pink. "He didn't guilt me. I offered." Mom sighed, tilting her head. "Of course you did, sweetheart. That's just who you are. But Joey needs to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. You don't want to encourage bad habits, do you?" I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. I wanted to step in, to defend Clara, but I stayed put. I wanted to see how far Mom would go. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "I helped him because he's family. Isn't that what we do?" Mom's smile tightened. "Yes, but some family members need tough love. You're too soft, Clara. He'll never change if you keep babying him." That was it. I walked over, pretending to have just joined them. "Everything okay here?" Mom turned, startled. "Of course. We were just chatting." Clara looked uncomfortable. "I should go soon," she said softly. Mom patted her shoulder. "Drive safe, dear." After she left, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why did you say that to her?" Mom blinked innocently. "Say what?" "You know what. You basically told her I'm a leech." "I did not," she said sharply. "I was protecting her. She doesn't know you like we do, Joey. She thinks you're helpless. I didn't want her wasting her time, or money, on your sob stories." "My sob stories," I said, my voice rising. "You hung up on me when I asked for help. She's the only one who even cared." Mom crossed her arms. "Because she's naive. We're trying to make you stronger, Joey. You can't expect handouts forever." I laughed bitterly. "Right? Because you've all been such great teachers." That night, I left early without saying goodbye. Clara texted me later. "Your mom said some strange things. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Yeah." I'm used to it. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I'd been patient, careful, subtle, but they were never going to see me differently. They'd already written the ending to my story before I even started living it. Then something unexpected happened that made the situation explode. A week later, I got a call from the lawyer who'd handled Uncle Jameson's estate. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I just wanted to confirm that the funds have been successfully transferred into your trust account." "Thanks," I said, distracted. "Is everything else settled?" "Yes. Though I should mention, your mother left a few voicemails here. She's been asking questions about the will." My stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know if she was entitled to any portion of the inheritance." I, of course, couldn't disclose details, but she was insistent. I thanked him and hung up, my mind spinning. How did she even find out? I hadn't told a soul. Not even Clara. I hadn't bought anything new. I hadn't changed my routine. Then it hit me. Mom must have noticed the call history when I borrowed her charger last week. My phone had lit up with a voicemail from the lawyer's office, and she'd probably gone snooping, like she always did. Later that evening, she showed up unannounced at my apartment. She didn't even knock, just opened the door like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she said. I felt my stomach knot. "About what?" She closed the door behind her, crossing her arms. "Don't play dumb, Joey. I know about the will." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," she said, her voice sharp. "The lawyer called. You think I don't have ears? How long were you planning on keeping it from us?" My throat went dry. "There's nothing to keep." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "I spoke to Jameson's lawyer myself. He didn't give me details, but I'm not an idiot. You think you can hide $100 million from your own family?" The room went quiet. She'd said it. Out loud. $100 million. I looked at her, stunned, as she stepped closer. "Do you have any idea what that money could do for this family? For me? For your brother and sister? You're not capable of handling that kind of responsibility, Joey. You'd blow it on something stupid within a year." "Wow," I said quietly. "Thanks for the confidence." She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you. We can manage it together. I already spoke to Nate. He knows someone who can invest it properly. We'll make sure it doesn't go to waste." "You told Nate?" I said, my heart pounding. "Of course I did. He's family. We look out for each other." I stared at her, speechless. In a single breath, she'd told my brother about my inheritance, something I hadn't even told my best friend, and was already making plans for my money. "Get out," I said quietly. Her expression hardened. "Excuse me. You heard me. Get out of my apartment." "Joey, don't be ridiculous." "Now." She glared at me for a long moment before finally grabbing her purse. "You're making a huge mistake," she said coldly. "When you come to your senses, don't expect me to fix this for you." The door slammed behind her. I stood there in silence, my pulse hammering in my ears. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust. She'd invaded my privacy, gone behind my back, and told Nate something I wasn't ready for anyone to know. But it was only when Nate called later that night, laughing, casual, smug, that I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. "Bro," he said, "you really thought you could hide $100 million from us? Come on, man. We're family." I didn't answer. He continued, "Look, don't make this weird. Mom and I just want to make sure you don't do anything stupid. We're going to help you, okay? That's what family does." That line, the same one Clara had said with kindness, came out of his mouth like poison. And that's when I knew. They weren't helping me. They were circling, like vultures. The next few days were chaos. Quiet, suffocating chaos. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, voicemails from Mom, from Nate, even from Amber. I ignored them all. Every message sounded the same. "Joey, we just want to talk. Joey, don't be immature. Joey, you're not thinking straight." Each time I saw their names light up on my screen, my stomach twisted. The one thing I'd wanted to avoid, exactly what I was testing for, had happened. The moment they smelled money, all pretense of respect or care evaporated. By the fourth day, I finally turned my phone off completely. The silence was a relief, but it also left me alone with my thoughts. My mind replayed that moment with Mom, the way she'd looked at me, not as her son, but as a walking opportunity. It was like I'd been reduced to a number in her head. I didn't tell Clara what happened. She texted me once, just a short "Hey, everything okay? Haven't heard from you." I typed out a reply 3 times and deleted it every time. I didn't want to drag her into the mess. She was the only one who'd shown me genuine kindness. That weekend, I went for a long drive. No destination, just the road and my thoughts. The money still didn't feel real. I hadn't touched it. The lawyer had it locked away in a trust, exactly as I'd instructed. I didn't want the cars, the houses, the power. Not yet. Not when my head was still full of noise. At one point, I stopped at a small diner off the highway. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched families come and go. Parents laughing, kids arguing, people just being together. It made something ache inside me. I realized that money didn't fix loneliness. If anything, it just exposed who had always been fake. When I got back home, I found a note taped to my door in my mom's handwriting. Joey, we're worried. You're shutting everyone out. Call us. We just want what's best. Love, Mom. That last word, love, looked like an afterthought. 2 days later, she showed up again, this time with Nate. I heard the knock and instantly felt dread settle in my chest. I almost didn't answer, but their persistence made it clear they wouldn't leave until I did. When I opened the door, Mom gave me that tight, rehearsed smile. We just want to talk, she said. Nate stood behind her with his arms crossed, already looking irritated. About what? I asked flatly. Mom stepped inside without waiting for permission. Joey, this is ridiculous. We're family. You're acting like we're strangers. Maybe that's because you are, I said. Nate scoffed. Here we go? Playing the victim again. Mom shot him a warning look, then turned back to me. We're just worried, honey. You've never had this kind of responsibility before. $100 million isn't something you can just sit on. People will take advantage of you. I stared at her. You mean like you did? Her face tightened. Don't twist my words. I was trying to protect you. By calling the lawyer? By telling Nate. Nate held up his hands. Whoa, relax. It's not like we're trying to steal from you. Could have fooled me, I said. Mom's voice sharpened. Enough with the attitude. You have no idea what you're doing. That money came from family. It belongs to this family. There it was. The truth. I almost laughed. It belongs to me, Mom. Uncle Jameson left it to me. Not you. Not Nate. Not anyone else. She stepped closer, her voice dropping low. You're not equipped to handle this, Joey. You've struggled your whole life. You're impulsive, emotional, irresponsible. Say broke, I interrupted. Go ahead. That's what you mean. She froze for a second, then exhaled. Fine. Yes. You've always been unstable with money. You think I'm being cruel, but I'm trying to save you from yourself. I felt something crack inside me. You don't even know me. The argument spiraled after that. Nate chimed in, lecturing me about financial literacy while bragging about his investments. Mom started talking about forming a family trust so that everyone benefits. I tried to stay calm, but eventually I just said, get out. They didn't move. Now, I repeated. Mom looked like she wanted to say more, but Nate grabbed her arm. Let's go, Mom. He'll come around. Before leaving, Mom turned and said something that hit harder than anything else that night. You're making the same mistake your father did, thinking you can do everything alone. And look how that ended. The door clicked shut, and suddenly the apartment felt smaller than ever. I sank into the couch, staring at the dark TV screen, hearing her words echo in my head. That night, I barely slept. Every thought looped back to the same question. How had I become the villain in their story? They were the ones who'd turned their backs on me when I needed them most. Yet now I was the ungrateful one for not handing over a fortune. A few days passed. Then Amber called. I almost ignored it, but decided to answer. Her voice was cautious, softer than usual. Hey, Joey, she said. I heard about what happened with Mom. Of course you did, I said. She hesitated. Look, she didn't mean to upset you. She worries. I laughed quietly. She's worried about her cut. Amber didn't deny it. Maybe, but you can't just shut us all out. Your family. Funny, I said. When I was struggling, you didn't sound this concerned. Come on, Joey, she said, almost pleading. That's not fair. We all have our own lives. Yeah, and now that mine suddenly matters, everyone remembers I exist. She was silent for a while. Then she said something that stuck with me. You think this money changes who we are? But it's changing you too. I hung up. The next morning, I went for another drive, this time out toward the countryside. The roads were empty, the fields stretching endlessly under gray skies. I found a small park by a lake and sat there for hours. The water was calm, unmoving. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. When I got home that evening, I checked my mail. Among the bills and junk flyers was a small handwritten envelope. It was from Clara. Inside was a simple note. Hey Joey, I don't know what's going on, but I wanted to tell you something. Whatever it is, don't let them change who you are. You've always had a good heart, and that's worth more than any money. If you ever need a place to breathe, my door's open. See, I read it twice, then folded it neatly and put it in my wallet. For some reason, it felt like an anchor, a reminder that not everyone saw me as a paycheck. Over the next week, I started avoiding town altogether. I drive to remote cafes, eat at odd hours, and park on side streets just to avoid running into anyone I knew. Word had spread fast. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly texted me. Hey man, long time no talk, or heard some crazy news, hit me up. I didn't reply to any of them. But the real blow came the following Monday. I stopped by the grocery store, and the cashier, a woman I'd known since high school, smiled and said, So, Mr. Millionaire, what's it like being famous? My stomach sank. Where'd you hear that? I asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, your brother mentioned it. Said he's helping you manage it all. Must be nice having a smart family. I left the groceries right there and walked out. The air outside felt colder than usual. Nate hadn't just told Mom. He was telling everyone. That night, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the faint hum of the city, feeling completely hollow. My own brother was bragging about money that wasn't even his, and Mom was probably already fantasizing about family foundations and photo ops. For a while, I thought about giving it all up, signing the money away, disappearing somewhere far, somewhere quiet. Maybe then they'd finally stop seeing me as a bank account. But deep down, another thought started to form. A quieter one. If they wanted to play this game, maybe I could play it better. So I called the lawyer. We talked for over an hour. I asked about restructuring the trust, about the legalities of anonymity, about how to protect assets without anyone knowing where they were. He listened carefully and said, Mr. Carter, it's your estate. You can do whatever you wish. Just remember, secrecy is power. That phrase stuck in my head like a mantra. Over the next few weeks, I started laying the groundwork. I didn't tell anyone, not Clara, not even my lawyer, the full picture. I moved quietly, methodically, transferring certain assets, setting up a holding company under a new name. I started to realize that revenge didn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, the most satisfying kind was silent, invisible, and perfectly timed. But before I could fully disappear, my family made one last move, a desperate one. Because apparently, when vultures can't find a carcass, they start circling harder. And soon, I'd find out just how far they were willing to go. The silence was the best part. No more calls. No more knocks. No more guilt-tripped family dinners. It was like someone had lifted a weight I'd been carrying my whole life without realizing it. I didn't tell anyone, but I moved out of my apartment quietly one morning. I left the key on the counter, the fridge empty, and the place spotless, almost like I'd never existed there at all. The new place was small but hidden, a private home tucked along a quiet hillside 2 towns over. I bought it through a holding company I'd set up with the lawyer's help. No one knew my name was on the paperwork. It wasn't a mansion, just a modern, secluded place with tall windows, a lake view, and the kind of peace I'd never had before. Every morning, I'd wake up to birds instead of traffic, coffee in hand, the fog rolling off the water. And every morning, I'd remind myself, they don't know I'm here. The first month was strange. I wasn't used to stillness. For so long, my days had been noise, people doubting me, criticizing me, treating me like I'd never measure up. Now I was alone, and I realized how much space that noise had taken in my head. Once it was gone, I finally had room to think. So I started working. Not the kind of work they'd respect. No office, no title, but something better. I started reading, studying, planning. I learned how to invest without anyone knowing. I put money into businesses under quiet aliases, cafes, small logistics companies, even a real estate group in another state. I wasn't chasing wealth anymore. I was building control. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family spent their lives trying to look successful. I was becoming it in silence. Months passed. The lawyer handled most of the official matters for me, but I started taking more interest in how things worked. I realized Uncle Jameson hadn't just been rich, he'd been smart. He'd built a network of small companies that all supported each other, from construction to finance to property management. And now I was at the center of it, rebuilding it piece by piece, growing it even bigger. And no one had any idea. I didn't post online. I didn't tell old friends. To them, I'd vanished. Rumors floated around town that I'd gone bankrupt, moved overseas, or checked into rehab. My mom even told people she hadn't heard from me in months, like I was some lost cause. I let her talk. The more they underestimated me, the freer I became. Meanwhile, Clara kept texting once in a while. Always simple things like "hope you're doing okay" or "haven't seen you in a bit, miss our talks." I finally replied one day and invited her to lunch. We met at a little diner halfway between our towns. When she saw me, she smiled with that same quiet warmth I remembered. "You look different," she said, tilting her head. "Better or worse?" I joked. "Better. Calmer." We talked for hours. I didn't tell her everything, just that I'd started something new and was finally figuring things out. She didn't ask for details, and I loved her for that. No curiosity about the money, no subtle questions, just genuine care. Before she left, she gave me a small plant. "For your new place," she said, "so it doesn't feel empty." That plant sat on my kitchen counter for months. Every time I saw it, it reminded me that not everyone in my bloodline was rotten. By the end of that year, my portfolio had doubled. I'd quietly acquired a controlling interest in 3 small companies and launched one under a new brand name, Carter and Vale Holdings. I hired a team under pseudonyms, gave them generous pay, and kept my name entirely off the radar. Power didn't feel like what I thought it would. It wasn't loud or thrilling. It was quiet, deliberate, peaceful. It was waking up each day knowing no one could touch what you built. Then, one morning, I saw something that made me stop mid-sip of coffee. An article popped up online. "Nate Carter joins real estate board for upcoming development." There was a photo of him in a suit, shaking hands with investors. The caption mentioned backing from private funding. I couldn't help but laugh, because that private funding came from one of my shell companies. He was bragging about success that I'd financed, without him ever knowing it. It was poetic in a way. He'd mocked me for being broke, told me to get a job, and now he was unknowingly working for me. I could have ended it there, just smiled at the irony and kept living quietly. But there was still one part of me, the part that remembered every sneer and every time they made me feel worthless, that whispered, "They still think you're nothing. They still don't know." So I started planning something bigger. Not revenge yet, not exactly. More like exposure. I wanted the truth to reveal itself naturally, in a way they couldn't twist or deny. I began attending a few local charity galas and business mixers, always under my alias, Elliot Vale. I wore tailored suits, stayed polite, and listened more than I spoke. I learned how people like my mom operated, fake kindness wrapped around greed. And I learned how to spot it instantly. It wasn't long before I was invited to a high-end real estate banquet in the city. I recognized a few of the names on the list, including Nate's. He was scheduled to give a short speech about modern investment strategies. That night, as I stood in that crowd, watching him talk about hard work and humble beginnings, I felt something shift again. The room clapped for him, and he smiled like he owned the world. And all I could think was, "You have no idea who signed your checks." I didn't confront him that night. Not yet. I left early, got in my car, and drove back to my quiet house on the hill. But as I drove, one thought played over and over in my head. I had built something that could change all of our lives. And this time, I'd decide who deserved it. The next step wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be vengeful, at least not at first. It would be subtle. A slow, deliberate peeling back of every mask they wore. Because while they were still playing at being successful, I was about to show them what real power looked like. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just shock them. It would rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. It started with an email. Just one. From a name I didn't recognize at first, Margaret Bellamy, a partner at a prestigious firm that handled luxury estate sales. She wrote that a client named Linda Carter, my mother, had applied for a line of credit using collateral tied to an upcoming inheritance trust. My inheritance. That was the moment I knew the game had officially begun. I called her office the next morning, still using my alias, Elliot Vale. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Vale, thank you for returning my call. We're simply verifying that this particular trust, the Carter Family Beneficiary Fund, is legitimate. We've had conflicting information. Conflicting information. Translation, my mother was lying to them." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "I see. Well, I happen to be familiar with the trustees overseeing that account. I can assure you no such collateralization has been approved. I'd proceed with caution. She thanked me and promised to freeze all pending applications until further notice. The satisfaction that washed over me was cold, clean, and quiet. Mom was trying to borrow money based on my inheritance, money she'd already been told she had no access to. She must have thought if she pretended it was a family account, no one would dig too deep. She underestimated me. Again, I didn't call her. I didn't even let her know I knew. Instead, I decided to let her, and the rest of them, walk right into the trap they'd built themselves. The next few weeks, I made moves like a chess player setting the board for checkmate. I created a public-facing branch of one of my shell companies under my alias. It looked like a small but legitimate investment firm that specialized in development partnerships. I used it to quietly buy out a few of the struggling companies my brother's firm worked with. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable, just one after another, until half of his network was indirectly owned by me. Every email he sent, every contract he signed, every deal he bragged about online, it all eventually led back to me. He didn't know it, of course. To him, I was still his loser little brother who couldn't hold a job. The real test came when my lawyer forwarded me an invitation. It was for a charity gala in the city, the same one my mother had been obsessed with for years. She'd always wanted to be on the event committee, but never had the status to pull it off. This year, though, the primary sponsor was Carter and Vail Holdings, my company. I decided I'd go. When the night arrived, I wore a black tailored suit, slicked my hair back, and left the name tag blank. Nobody there knew me as Joey. To them, I was Mr. Vail, investor, strategist, quiet success story. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and expensive laughter. Waiters floated by with champagne. I was standing near the silent auction table when I heard her voice. Mom's. That familiar, self-satisfied tone cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Oh, I'm so glad we're all here," she was telling someone. "My son Nate helped fund part of this event. He's doing very well in real estate, you know." I turned. She looked exactly as she always had. Flawless hair, pearl earrings, that same air of control. Nate was beside her, his tie perfectly straight, his grin confident. Amber stood behind them, nodding along, holding her drink like she didn't want to be there. When Mom's eyes met mine, she froze. "Do I know you?" she asked. I smiled politely. "Not personally. Elliot Vail." I offered my hand. She shook it, still searching my face. "Ah, yes. You're one of the sponsors, aren't you?" "Something like that," I said. Nate stepped forward, ever the opportunist. "Carter and Vail, right? We've heard a lot about your firm. My company's actually partnered with one of your subsidiaries." I tilted my head. "Really? Which one?" "Midwest Urban Development." I smiled faintly. "Ah, yes. Good people." He grinned, oblivious. "Yeah, we've got a few projects lined up this quarter. If you're ever in need of consultants, I'd be happy to." Mom interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't be rude, Nathan. Mr. Vail probably gets offers all the time." I laughed lightly. "Actually, I don't mind. I admire ambition. It's a rare thing these days." They had no idea who I was. I spent the rest of the evening watching them work the room. Mom charming investors with empty flattery, Nate boasting about his deals, Amber looking more uncomfortable by the minute. Later that night, during the live auction, the host called for final pledges. The top item was a land development contract worth several million, an exclusive partnership opportunity. When the bidding began, I raised my number discreetly. Mom turned to watch, eyes gleaming. She whispered something to Nate, probably telling him to bid too, to impress the crowd. He did. I raised again. He followed. I raised once more, calm, deliberate. By the end, I'd outbid him by a landslide. The host announced, "Sold to Mr. Vail of Carter and Vail Holdings." The crowd applauded politely. Nate laughed awkwardly, pretending not to care. When it was over, I walked past him on my way out. "Pleasure doing business," I said. He smiled, confused, thinking I was just being cordial. 2 weeks later, his company got a notice that one of their biggest investors was pulling out due to restructuring. That investor? Me. A week after that, another one followed. Then another. Within a month, his company was bleeding money. His project stalled. Investors went silent. The empire he'd built on borrowed pride and fake charm started crumbling from the inside. Mom called him every day, panicking. I knew because she tried calling me again too. Left voicemails, desperate now. Joey, please call me. There's been confusion. Nate's business is falling apart. I think someone's sabotaging us. Sabotaging us. That made me laugh out loud. For the first time in my life, they needed me. And I wasn't there. But I wasn't done. Remember that line of credit Mom had tried to secure earlier? I made a quiet call to the same firm. Posed again as Mr. Vale. I asked them to release all pending documentation related to the Carter Family Beneficiary Fund to the Financial Oversight Board for review. I didn't have to lie, just suggest that possible fraudulent activity had been reported. Within a week, her accounts were frozen for investigation. Her reputation, the one she'd spent decades polishing, began to crack. She couldn't host events, couldn't access funds, couldn't even renew her business memberships. People she used to gossip with stopped returning her calls. And all I did was wait. One night, around midnight, I got a knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I even checked the camera feed. Mom stood outside, hair messy, face pale, clutching her purse like it was a life vest. When I opened the door, she froze. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Joey, she whispered. Oh my God. Hi, Mom, I said calmly. It's been a while. She blinked hard. You're Mr. Vale? I nodded. Her hands trembled. You did this. To us. I stepped aside so she could see the house behind me. Clean, quiet, modern. You did it to yourself, I said softly. You tried to take what wasn't yours. Her voice broke. I just wanted to protect you. By stealing from me? Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me this time. I'd seen that act before. You made me feel small my whole life, I said. And the second I had something of my own, you tried to take it. You didn't protect me, Mom. You made sure I'd never believe I deserved more. She shook her head, muttering, You don't understand. I understand perfectly. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. She finally turned to leave, shoulders shaking. But just before she stepped off the porch, I said, I'm not cruel, Mom. I'm just done. You and Nate will be fine, eventually. Just not on my back anymore. She didn't look back. When she was gone, I walked out onto the deck. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, perfectly still. It was over. But even then, I knew this wasn't just revenge. It was balance. They'd spent their lives teaching me that family meant control, that love meant leverage. I'd finally taught them what it really meant. That once you break trust, it doesn't matter how much blood you share. You're just strangers in the end. And though part of me wanted to let it rest, another part knew the story wasn't quite finished yet. Because there was one person left I hadn't reached out to. Clara. It was a few weeks before I finally called Clara. I didn't know how to explain everything without it sounding like a movie plot. But she picked up on the first ring, cheerful as ever. Joey. Wow, it's been ages, she said. How are you? I'm good, I said quietly. Better, actually. There's something I want to tell you. And something I want to do. We met the next afternoon at the same little diner where we'd had lunch months before. She looked the same. Calm, genuine, no makeup, no pretenses. Just the kind of person who didn't need to pretend to be decent. I told her everything. From the inheritance to the fake name, to what I'd done to my family. I expected her to look horrified. But she didn't. She just listened, stirring her coffee slowly, then said, You didn't hurt them. You showed them who they really were. I exhaled. It still feels heavy. Of course it does, she said. You cared about them, even if they didn't deserve it. You just finally stopped letting them use that against you. There was a long pause before she added, So what happens now? That question had haunted me for weeks. I'd already seen the fallout start to unfold like a slow storm. Nate's company had gone under completely. The last I'd heard, he'd been forced to sell his house and was working under someone else, someone who probably didn't know half of what he'd lost. He'd stopped boasting online, stopped calling investors his team. Mom was worse. Her reputation was gone. The financial probe had embarrassed her publicly. The people she used to brag to now crossed the street to avoid her. She'd lost her committees, her friends, her image. She still had a small pension, but not the world she'd built her ego on. Amber had reached out to me once, just once. Her message was short. You didn't deserve how they treated you. I hope you're happy now. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry at her. I just didn't know what to say. Now, sitting across from Clara, I finally did. What happens now, I said, is peace. I don't need them anymore. But I also don't need to punish them anymore. It's done. She smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time to live. We finished our coffee in silence. The world outside the window felt oddly brighter, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Over the next few months, I started giving back in small ways, quietly, anonymously. A few scholarships through one of my holding companies. A donation to a youth shelter. I even helped fund a local business in Clara's town when she mentioned it was struggling. She found out eventually, of course, but only because she recognized my handwriting on a thank you letter from the owners. "You're impossible," she said over the phone, laughing softly. "Just making sure the good people win for once," I said. Time passed. Mom sent me one final letter, handwritten, shaky, probably because she didn't know how else to reach me. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my desk for days before I finally unfolded it. "Joey, I don't know what to say except I was wrong. About everything. I thought controlling things meant protecting them. I thought pushing you meant helping you. I didn't realize I was just trying to make you smaller so I could feel in control. You didn't deserve that. I hope one day you can forgive me. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times before setting it down. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt calm. Maybe that was forgiveness. Not rushing to feel one way or another, just letting things settle. The following weekend, I drove back to the old town for the first time in nearly a year. Everything looked smaller, the houses, the streets, even the people walking by. I stopped in front of the laundromat apartment I used to live above. The windows were dark. Someone else lived there now. I stood there for a while, remembering that version of me, the one who was tired, broke, and still trying to make his family proud. I didn't hate him. I just wished I could tell him that it was never his job to prove anything to anyone. When I got back to my lake house that night, I found Clara sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She'd started visiting more often lately, bringing books, tea, and quiet conversation. She smiled when she saw me. "You look lighter," she said. "I think I finally am," I said. We sat there for a long time, watching the sky turn orange and gold. I told her I'd been thinking of expanding my company into community projects, helping people who reminded me of who I used to be. She liked that idea. "That's a good kind of full circle," she said. The last of the sunlight flickered across the lake, and for once, I didn't feel like something was missing. I didn't feel angry or bitter, just free. My mother would probably never fully understand what she lost. Nate would rebuild, eventually, though maybe humbler this time. Amber would keep her distance, quietly keeping her job, her head down. And me? I'd keep building, but not for revenge anymore. For peace. Because that's the thing no one tells you about revenge. It's not about getting even. It's about getting past it. I glanced at the calm water, the reflection of the sunset spreading like fire across its surface, and smiled. "Funny," I said quietly. "I had to lose a family to finally find peace." And Clara, without missing a beat, replied, "No, Joey, you didn't lose one. You just made room for a better one." The wind rippled across the lake, and for the first time in my life, I believed her.